You're watching Noir Lane. I'm your host, David. Remember, every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us what part of the world you're watching from. Subscribe and hit the like button. Join us in the mystery, and let's dive into the story. Chapter 1. The knock came at 20 minutes to 11. A single rap on the front door that sounded like someone tapping a coffin to check whether the occupant had opinions. I was at my desk in the office, shuffling paper that had no intention of earning its keep, while Wolf sat in the red leather chair with a book angled precisely for his eyes and contempt angled generally for the world. Fritz had cleared away the remains of dinner, an arrangement of lamb, green beans, and a sauce Wolf had approved with a grunt that counted as applause. Upstairs, the orchids were secure in their warm kingdom, tended on schedule, watered with ceremony, and regarded by Wolf as the only citizens in New York who understood duty. He did not look up Archie. Yes. Attend. That was it. No flourish. No curiosity. Wolf's curiosity has the manners of a duke. It waits to be introduced. I went to the hall, opened the front door, and found nobody. The stoop was empty, the street lamps dull in the winter haze, the air sharp enough to make your lungs feel as if they were being appraised. A cab rolled by, a distant horn complained, and somewhere downtown a siren did what sirens do when they have opinions about human behavior. I stepped out and looked both ways. The sidewalk was clear for half a block. No hurried footsteps, no retreating shoulders, no nervous silhouettes slipping around the corner. Whoever had knocked had done it with the confidence of someone who did not fear being recognized, or the competence of someone who knew he would not be. Then I saw the envelope, proof that whoever had knocked had done it to be remembered and not to be seen. It lay on the stoop just to the right of the door frame, plain as a grocery receipt. No name, no seal, no wax, no flourish, nothing but a blunt rectangle of paper offering itself like bait. I picked it up and went back inside. Wolf was still reading. His face did not change as I crossed the office and set the envelope on his desk. Anonymous, I said. Wolf glanced at it as if it had insulted him personally. Indeed, I waited, because I have learned that Wolf's silence is often a lever, and I am usually the one expected to move under it. He did not move, I said. No one on the porch. One knock and vanish. Either a child's prank or a man with nerves. Wolf's eyes lifted, met mine briefly, and dropped again to the envelope. Open it. I did, because Wolf dislikes licking paper, and I dislike being idle. Inside was a single sheet, unlined, with a time and an address written in a firm hand. 11:30 p.m. 312 East 47th Street, 3rd floor. That was all. No greeting, no signature, no explanation. Along with the paper, something metallic slid into my palm, a brass button, round, heavy, and worn smooth around the edges as if it had been handled too often. It was the kind of button that had belonged on a uniform, not a suit. It had an emblem on it, a simple design, and two faint scratches across the face that looked like someone's attempt to erase a story. I set the button on Wolf's desk beside the note. Wolf looked at it without touching it. He can stare at an object and make it feel guilty. Urgency loves restraint, he said. And restraint loves liars. Maybe it loves fear, I said. Wolf's lips tightened slightly. That was his version of amusement. He lowered his book, finally giving the envelope his full attention. East 47th Street, he murmured. The address is not obscure. It is near the river and near expense. Not the kind of address I pick for midnight confessions, I said. Wolf's eyes remained on the button. A uniform button. Could be from a doorman, I offered. Could be from a messenger. Could be from a man who wants us to think a doorman did it. Wolf nodded slowly. Yes. I waited for the rest. Wolf likes to let his thoughts cool before he serves them. He said, "Bring it." He did not mean the button, he meant my coat. I stared at him. We are going. He looked offended by the question. We are invited, Archie, with a time, with restraint, with an object selected for symbolism. If we refuse, we lose the only advantage we have, We arrive when the sender has chosen and discover why. You said it might be a trap. Wolf's eyes met mine. A1. Knock invitation is either a trap or a confession. The distinction is useful only after we have attended. That was Wolf's logic, and it had its own tyranny. He does not leap into danger because he enjoys it. He does it because his mind dislikes unfinished patterns. I rose, went to the hall, and fetched his coat. Fritz appeared at the dining room doorway, expression politely concerned, as if wondering why the household was about to commit a social error like leaving the house at night. "Mr. Wolf," Fritz said. "Coffee." Wolf looked at the clock, then at Fritz. "Number beer." Fritz's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he nodded and returned with beer, in a glass that looked like it had been polished for a ceremony. Wolf drank a slow swallow, then stood with the solemnity of a man stepping off a throne. While he put on his coat, I took the button again and studied it under the desk lamp. The emblem looked familiar, but familiarity is a slippery thing in New York. 1,000 buildings have doormen, 100 hotels have crests, 12 clubs have their own little symbols for their own little gods. I slipped the button into my pocket. We went out into the cold. The brownstone behind us looked warm, steady, civilized, as if it disapproved of our leaving. Wolf got into the cab with a grunt, arranged himself with dignity, and stared straight ahead as if the city were an inconvenience he was forced to tolerate between meals. The driver looked at the address, lifted his eyebrows and said, "East 47th, you sure?" Wolf said, "Proceed." The driver proceeded. New York at that hour has two faces. One is bright, noisy, and desperate to pretend tomorrow is guaranteed. The other is quiet, watchful, and honest in the way a dark alley is honest. We moved through pockets of both, past lit windows and shuttered shops, past couples hurrying with collars raised, past men who stood too still on corners as if waiting for a signal. Wolf said nothing. When Wolf says nothing in a cab, it means he is angry at the cab, the city, and the concept of movement, but also that he is thinking. We reached East 47th Street at 11:26. The building at number 312 was not a brownstone. It was a narrow, respectable structure with a small lobby and a doorman who looked like he had been hired for his discretion as much as his posture. The kind of doorman who could watch a murder walk past and still say, "Good evening, sir." He eyed us when we entered, not with suspicion, but with calculation. Wolf's bulk and presence carry their own introduction. "Can I help you?" the doorman said. Wolf looked at him, then at me, Archie. I produced the note and held it up. We were invited. The doorman's eyes flicked to the note, then to Wolf's face. There was a small shift in his expression, a flicker of something like recognition, then caution. "Third floor," he said. "No name," I said. He swallowed. "No name, that's consistent," I said. "Does anyone live on the third floor?" The doorman hesitated. "An office, not exactly a residence." "What kind of office?" I asked. He looked at Wolf again, then said reluctantly, "Legal consulting." "That's vague," I said. His mouth tightened. "It's what I know." Wolf moved toward the elevator without waiting for further hospitality. The doorman's gaze dropped briefly to Wolf's coat, then to my pocket, and then away. I noticed it and filed it away. The elevator was old but polished, a small box of brass and mirrors. Wolf stood in it like an offended monument. I pressed the third floor button and watched the numbers tick up with the slow patience of a machine that has never heard of urgency. The doors opened on a quiet hallway with thick carpet and soft lighting. There were two doors. One had a frosted glass panel that read, "Hollis and Bent Consulting." The other was unmarked. Wolf's eyes went to the unmarked door. "Restraint," he murmured. "Always the liar's perfume." I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, because Wolf's rule about knocks only applies when other people do it. Still no answer. Wolf said, "Open it." I tried the knob, locked. I looked at Wolf. We were invited, but not admitted. Wolf's eyes narrowed. That suggests haste. I stepped back and examined the door. Solid wood, good lock, not the kind you pick with a hairpin unless you have a hobby and a forgiving schedule. I turned to the other door, the one with the frosted glass. Hollis and Bent, I said. If this is a trap, at least it's filed under business. I knocked. A moment passed, then footsteps. The door opened a crack, held by a chain, and a man peered out. He was in his 30s, lean, wearing a white shirt with the collar open and the tie hanging loose, as if he had abandoned decorum in a hurry. His hair was neat, but disturbed at the temples. His eyes were alert and exhausted. He saw Wolf and froze. "Mr. Wolf," he said. Wolf's eyes narrowed. "You know me," the man swallowed. "Yes." "Then remove the chain," Wolf said. The man hesitated, then unhooked it and opened the door fully. "Please, come in." We entered. The office was not large. A desk, a couple of chairs, a filing cabinet, a narrow couch, a lamp on a side table. The kind of office a man uses to pretend he is legitimate while doing something that is not. There was a smell of coffee gone cold and paper warmed by anxiety. The man closed the door, and his gaze flicked to my pocket again. Wolf said, "You have invited me without your name. That is discourteous." The man's lips tightened. "I did not put my name on the envelope, because I did not know if it would reach you." "Safely interesting," Wolf said. "State your name now." The man inhaled. "My name is Roland Bent." Wolf's eyes narrowed slightly at the name on the frosted glass. "Bent." Roland nodded quickly. "Yes, Hollis is my partner. He is not here. He left earlier." Wolf's gaze moved across the room, taking it in. "You invited me to the 3rd floor. That is a hallway, not your office." Roland's eyes flicked toward the unmarked door. "That door is the reason I sent the note," I said. "What's behind it?" Roland swallowed. "A room we sublease." Calvin insisted on calling it for a client, but it was his private room for meetings he didn't want in our files. Wolf's expression remained calm. "And your client knocked once at my door, left a brass button, and wrote a time and address." Roland's face went pale. "You have the button." I pulled it from my pocket and held it up. Roland stared at it, as if it were a small bomb. "Yes, that's it," Wolf said. "Explain." Roland's hands trembled slightly as he gestured toward the desk. "Please sit. I don't have much time." Wolf did not sit. Wolf saves sitting for places that deserve him. Roland took a breath. "The man who sent that is named Calvin Hollis." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Your partner?" Roland nodded. "Yes, Calvin Hollis. He is not merely my partner. He is. He has been doing something I did not understand until today." I said, "What kind of something?" Roland's eyes darted to the unmarked door again. "That room, Calvin uses it. He said it was for private meetings." Wolf's voice was calm. "And the button?" Roland's throat moved. "The button came off a uniform, a building uniform. The building where Calvin meets the people he calls donors." Wolf's eyes sharpened. "Donors," Roland swallowed. "He told me he was consulting for a charitable board, that he was helping them with logistics. But last week I saw him with a box of brass buttons, a handful. He said they were replacements." I said, "What kind of replacements?" Roland's mouth tightened. He would not say. He said it was nothing. He said I worried too much. Wolf said, "And today," Roland's voice shook. "Today he came in late white-faced and told me if anyone asked about him, I should say he had left the city. He said if I valued my life, I should not open the unmarked door." Then he looked at the clock and said, "I have one chance to get to Nero Wolf before midnight." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "He said my name." Roland nodded. "Yes," I said. "And he left." Roland swallowed. "He left." And 10 minutes later, I heard someone in the hallway. A knock. One knock, then silence. Wolf's gaze shifted toward the unmarked door again. "And you did not open it." Roland's voice was a whisper. Number Wolf's tone stayed mild. "You are a prudent man." Roland's face tightened. "I am a frightened man." Wolf nodded once. "Fear is often prudent," I said. Bent, if Hollis wanted to reach Wolf, why not call? Roland's eyes flicked. Because phones can be listened to. By whom? Wolf asked. Roland hesitated. I don't know, but Calvin was sure. Wolf's eyes narrowed, and he chose a one-knock message. Roland nodded, and his voice dropped further. That was his signal to me. One knock means do not open. One knock means you are being watched. Wolf stared at him. Then why are we here? Roland's mouth tightened. Because, he said, if I did not get you here, someone would die tonight. Not from a gun, not from a knife, from being put in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Wolf's gaze was steady. That is melodramatic. Roland shook his head, almost frantic. He meant it. He said the city would call it an accident. Wolf's expression did not change. Accidents are often designed. I moved toward the unmarked door. We came to see what is behind it. Do you have the key? Roland swallowed and opened a desk drawer with shaking fingers. He produced a key on a small ring. This, he said. Wolf's eyes went to the key, then to the button in my hand. Archie, the button. I handed it to him. Wolf did not touch it. He looked at it. Brass, he said. Worn uniform. Not doorman, not hotel. The emblem is simple. Roland's voice was tight. It's from Mercer Logistics. I blinked. That's on the riverside. Roland nodded quickly. Calvin consults for their accounts. They are hosting something tonight. A midnight handoff. He said something would happen there. Wolf's eyes narrowed. A club. A committee. A ceremony. Roland swallowed. Yes. Wolf lifted his gaze to me. We will open the door. I took the key from Roland, crossed the hall, and inserted it into the lock. Behind us, Roland said. Please. Be careful. That's what I get paid for, I said, and turned the key. The lock clicked. I opened the door. The room beyond was dark except for a slice of streetlight spilling through a narrow window. It was not an office. It was a storage room dressed up like one, with stacked boxes, a small table, and a coat rack. On the table sat a ledger and a silver tray. On the tray lay 3 more brass buttons, identical to the one in my hand, and beside them, a folded note. Wolf stepped into the doorway and sniffed once. Blood, he said. I stared at the floor and saw it. A dark stain near the far wall, pooled as if someone had tried to stand and failed. The stain ran in a thin line toward the baseboard, then vanished as if absorbed by the building itself. On the coat rack hung a uniform jacket, dark fabric, the kind worn by club staff. One sleeve was torn, and the torn edge was smeared darker than the rest. Roland made a sound behind me, half gasp, half sob. Wolf's voice was calm, almost annoyed. Archie, illuminate. I flipped the switch. The overhead light snapped on, harsh and unforgiving. And there, on the floor behind the boxes, was a man. He was alive, barely. And that fact, more than the blood, was the real message. His eyes were open, unfocused, his mouth moving without sound. His chest rose and fell in shallow, stubborn breaths. It was Calvin Hollis. Wolf looked down at him as if evaluating a damaged instrument. Then Hollis's eyes found mine, and his fingers twitched toward the silver tray, toward the buttons, toward the folded note. His lips moved again. This time, I heard it. Midnight, he whispered. Club, button, one chance. Then his eyes rolled back, and his hand fell. I looked up at Wolf. Wolf's face was set, his eyes cold with calculation. We go to Mercer Logistics, he said. I swallowed. Right now. Wolf nodded once. Yes, Archie, because a one-knock invitation is not merely a message, it is a countdown. Chapter 2, the address from the envelope put us into a part of town that does not bother to pretend it has a heart. It had warehouses, loading bays, and streets that were wide enough for trucks and narrow enough for trouble. The river was close, and so was that special smell New York gets when cold air meets old water and decides to sulk together. The building itself was a brick slab with a metal roll-up door and a narrow side entrance that looked as if it had been installed to give honest men a way in without forcing them to look dishonest. The sign on the wall read Mercer Logistics in letters that had been repainted recently, which is always interesting. A man who repaints a sign is a man who cares about what people think. Either that, or he cares about being found. The side door was ajar, not flung open, not carelessly left wide. Just ajar, as if someone had stepped out for a moment and expected to step back in. Wolf paused at the threshold long enough to make a priest nervous. "Archie," he said softly. "Observe." "I'm observing," I muttered. Because there are times when the obvious needs to be said, just to keep your dignity from packing a bag and leaving. Inside, the corridor lights were on. That was wrong. Warehouses do not waste electricity at midnight, unless they are doing business or staging a scene. The air smelled of cardboard, machine oil, and the kind of dust that has lived through 3 companies and 2 bankruptcies. At the end of the corridor was a glass panel door painted with Mercer's name. Behind the glass, the office lights were bright, too bright. A desk lamp was on. A coffee cup sat where it would if a man had been using it. The door was open. I stepped in first, because Wolf does not do firsts unless the first includes a chair. The office was tidy, and it was tidy in the particular way that suggests a man who likes control. File drawers shut. Papers stacked. A calendar on the wall with neat handwriting. A framed certificate announcing that Grant Mercer had once been voted something flattering by a trade group that probably charged a fee for the privilege. A swivel chair sat angled slightly away from the desk. I touched the chair's back with 2 fingers. Warm that one detail made my stomach tighten. Warmth has an honesty to it that most clues lack. Warmth says time. Warmth says close. Warmth says someone was here just minutes ago. Wolf entered behind me and stopped 2 steps into the room, eyes narrowing slightly. He did not move closer. He simply looked. Slowly, the way he looks at orchids when he suspects one has been watered incorrectly. His gaze traveled from the desk surface to the wastebasket, to the coat stand, to the floor, to the window and back. Behind the desk sat Grant Mercer. He was slumped to his right, chin dipped as if he had fallen asleep in mid-thought. His left hand rested on the armrest. His right hand was near a yellow legal pad. His eyes were half open, fixed on nothing. There was a neat hole centered on his forehead. It was not messy. It was not dramatic. It was efficient. Whoever had done it like a man punching a clock. I moved around the desk and checked him, because that is what you do even when you know the answer. He was dead. Not dead for hours. Not dead for days. Dead recently enough that the room still held him. The gun was not on the desk. Not on the floor. No obvious casing glittered in the light. There was no overturned chair, no spilled coffee, no sign of a struggle. Mercer had been shot, and then the office had been left to look like an office. That, I decided, was the first real message. I straightened and looked at Wolf. He was watching me, then watching the desk again, then watching the doorway. His face did not show surprise. It showed confirmation. "What time?" Wolf asked. I checked my watch. 12:12. Wolf nodded once. "We are late, by design." That was when the sirens arrived. They came fast, and they came close. The sound swelled in a hurry, like a wave that already knew where it wanted to break. Tires crunched outside. Doors slammed. Boots hit the sidewalk. A voice called an order. In less than a minute, the corridor was full of uniformed officers and plainclothes men who moved with the practiced confidence of people who have done this too often to be impressed. Then Inspector Kramer filled the doorway, and the room acquired its usual level of unpleasant honesty. Kramer saw Wolf and stopped short, like a dog that has smelled a rival. "For the love of heaven," he began, then caught sight of Mercer behind the desk and shut his mouth. He came in, face tightening, eyes sweeping the room. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Wolf's voice was calm. "We arrived because we were directed. You arrived because you were summoned." Kramer glared. "This is a crime scene." Wolf nodded, as if agreeing with an obvious statement from a slow student. "Yes." Kramer turned to a uniform. Keep the door clear. Nobody in, nobody out. He turned back to me. Goodwin, start talking. I gave him the version that mattered. One knock at our door, an envelope on the stoop, a time and an address, a brass button, Hollis bleeding on a third-floor storage room floor. The note, the whisper, Mercer. Kramer listened with the kind of attention he reserves for things he does not want to admit are important. Calvin Hollis, he said slowly. That name rings. He rang our bell, I said. Kramer did not smile. He nodded to a detective and said, "Find out who Mercer is, now." The detective looked at him, as if the inspector had asked him to find out what the moon was made of. "Inspector, we already know Mercer." "Then tell me," Kramer snapped. "Logistics," the detective said. "Warehousing. Distribution contracts. He's been adjacent to missing cargo complaints. Not enough to stick, always clean on paper." Wolf's eyes narrowed slightly. Clean on paper is often dirty elsewhere. Kramer ignored him and moved toward the desk, still not touching anything. No gun, no casing in plain sight. One of the tech men was already kneeling near the chair legs, scanning the carpet with a flashlight. Another was dusting the desk edge. A photographer was positioning himself for angles that would make Mercer look as dead as possible without being vulgar. Kramer looked at Wolf again, suspicion hardening. "Who called this in?" I blinked. "You tell me. You got here like you were already in the neighborhood." Kramer's mouth tightened. "We got a call 10 minutes ago. Anonymous, said there'd be a body at Mercer Logistics. Office door open." Wolf's eyes sharpened. 10 minutes ago." Kramer nodded. "We rolled." Wolf's tone stayed mild. Then the caller knew when the body would be discovered, or knew when it would be created. Kramer scowled. "We got a witness outside, says he heard the shot." "Convenient," I said. Kramer shot me a look. "Don't start." The witness was brought in, a thin man with a knit cap and hands that shook from cold or nerves. He claimed he had been across the street, heard a pop, and saw a man run out toward the alley. "Short guy," he said. "Dark coat. I know him. Eddie Rook." The minute the name was spoken, the room shifted. That is the trouble with names in police work. They are magnets. Once a name is in the air, it starts pulling attention toward itself whether it deserves it or not. Kramer stiffened. "Eddie Rook." The witness nodded quickly. "Runner. Small. Time always around." Kramer snapped to a detective. "Get a unit on Eddie Rook now." Wolf watched the witness with an expression that made me think of a man watching a stage actor forget a line. He did not interrupt, but when the witness finished, Wolf asked calmly, "You heard the shot, then you saw him. How much time passed?" "Seconds," the man said. Wolf nodded. "And you called it in immediately?" "Yes," the witness said. "I ran to a phone." "A phone booth," Kramer muttered, disgusted. The witness flushed. "I don't have a phone." Kramer waved him away, and the witness was led out. Kramer turned back to Wolf. "You got a problem with Eddie Rook?" Wolf's eyes remained calm. "I have a problem with certainty arriving before information." Kramer's face reddened. "We're not certain. We're following leads." Wolf inclined his head slightly. "Then do so, but recognize that a lead can be planted." Kramer glared. "By who?" Wolf did not answer directly. Instead, he turned his gaze to Mercer's desk and said, "Archie." I had already been scanning the desk while the witness performed. The yellow legal pad beneath Mercer's right hand had a line written on it. A half sentence, stopped mid-word, as if Mercer had been interrupted by the bullet. Button, club. Hollis. I slid the pad toward Wolf. Wolf read it, eyes narrowing, then looked at Kramer. "Inspector, the name you are circling may be a distraction." Kramer's jaw tightened. "What's that pad?" I handed it over. Kramer read, and his expression shifted into a look I recognize well. The look of a man who hates puzzles but hates being fooled more. "Button," Kramer said. "Club." Wolf's voice was calm. "Yes. We found a brass button delivered to our door. We found Hollis injured with more buttons. Now Mercer writes button and club. The thread is consistent. Kramer's mouth tightened. Riverside. Wolf's eyes sharpened. You know the emblem. Kramer grunted. Half the city knows it. Mercer Logistics. Their staff uniforms have brass buttons with that crest. A tech called softly from the floor. Inspector, found something. Kramer moved to him. I followed. Near the chair leg, half hidden in the carpet pile, lay another brass button. This one looked newer than the one from our envelope. It gleamed. The emblem was clean. The scratches were absent. A replacement. I picked it up with my handkerchief because I prefer to keep my fingerprints to myself. Wolf's eyes narrowed. A replacement button is a confession of proximity. Someone wearing that uniform was here. Kramer stared at it. Or someone wants it to look that way. Wolf nodded. Exactly. Kramer's gaze hardened. Wolf, what are you implying, that a club staffer walked in here and shot Mercer? Wolf's tone stayed mild. I am implying the killer wishes you to go where that button points. Kramer's face tightened. Why? Wolf looked at Mercer's body again, then at the warm chair. Because Mercer was not killed merely to be dead. He was killed to be found quickly on schedule. Kramer's voice was rough. We got here quick because we got a call, Wolf nodded. And that is the point. Whoever called it in knew exactly when to call. They knew when the office would be open, when the chair would still be warm, when the scene would look fresh. They also knew you would prefer Eddie Rook as an answer. Kramer scowled. Eddie Rook is not my preference. He's a suspect. Wolf's eyes held his. He is a convenient suspect. Small enough to blame, common enough to be seen running in shadows, useful enough to be named by a witness who wishes to be helpful. Kramer's jaw clenched. You saying my witness is lying? Wolf's tone was calm. I am saying he may be paid, frightened, or instructed. Those are three different motives that produce the same story. Kramer stared at Wolf for a long moment, then snapped to a detective. Double time on Rook. Bring him in alive. That was the first intelligent order Kramer had given all night. And I did not say so because I value my health. Wolf leaned slightly toward me and spoke low. Archie, we have been guided. Hollis to Mercer. Mercer to the club. The person arranging this wishes us to move predictably. And we are, I murmured. Like trains. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Trains can change tracks, but only if they notice the switch. Kramer returned, face set. All right, here's what I'm doing. I'm taking this scene. I'm grabbing Eddie Rook, and I'm sending a couple men to Riverside to see who was working tonight. Wolf nodded once. Good. Kramer's eyes narrowed. And what are you doing? Wolf's expression was steady. I am going home. Kramer blinked. Home. Wolf's voice was flat. Yes, I will think. You will flail. Later you will consult me. Kramer made a sound like he had swallowed a nail. You are impossible. Wolf's eyes narrowed slightly. I am consistent. It is a virtue you should cultivate. Outside, the air cut like a blade. The warehouse district looked the same as before, but the knowledge of Mercer's body behind that tidy desk made the street feel more awake. In the cab, Wolf sat heavy and silent for 3 blocks. Then he spoke. Archie, yes. A single knock, Wolf said. A single shot, a single button. Someone is composing a pattern with restraint. I stared out at the lamp sliding past, and restraint loves liars. Wolf's tone was calm, almost displeased. Yes, the liar here is not a small man. I thought of Eddie Rook, a runner, small time. A name that arrived too easily. I thought of the warm chair and the anonymous call that brought police to the door like a delivery service. Where does it end? I asked. Wolf's eyes narrowed. At the place the button points Archie, and at the person who believes a crime that times itself is a clever trick. It is not. It is a signature. The cab turned toward West 35th Street, back toward the brownstone, and Fritz and the orchids that bloom on schedule. Behind us, Mercer's office remained lit, bright in the dark warehouse block, as if the building had been instructed not to blink until the city finished reading what someone had written there. Chapter 3. By the time we got back to the brownstone, the air had that late, night bite that makes you feel as if the city is sharpening itself. Wolf went straight to the office without removing his coat, which is his way of showing displeasure at the universe. And I went to the kitchen because Fritz understands the relationship between coffee and sanity better than most psychiatrists. Fritz poured. I drank, and Wolf sat in his chair as if he had earned the right to despise the hour. "You are thinking," I said. "I am always thinking," Wolf replied. "You are always talking tonight. Both unnecessary." Kramer had taken my phone number as if it offended him and promised to call when he had Eddie Rook in a cage. That had been 30 minutes ago. In police time, 30 minutes can mean a confession or a corpse. Hollis was at Bellevue under guard, alive, but unconscious, and not expected to be talkative any time soon. Wolf had me place the items on his desk. The envelope, the original brass button from the stoop, the newer brass button found at Mercer's chair leg, sealed in a small evidence bag that Kramer had permitted me to keep temporarily because the inspector was too busy being irritated to remember how much he dislikes. Wolf being right. Wolf did not touch the button directly. He used a handkerchief, as if brass were contagious. He studied the face first, then flipped it, and his eyes narrowed slightly. "Ah," he said. I leaned in. "Ah, what?" Wolf angled the button so the desk lamp caught the back. There, stamped in small, neat letters, was a maker's mark and a number. It was not a club crest. It was not a uniform supplier. It was a clothing manufacturer, and not the kind that sells shirts in stacks, Wolf said. "This is not staff uniform issue." "But the crest," I began. Wolf shook his head, mildly annoyed at my insistence on yesterday's assumptions. "The crest belongs on the front. The mark on the back belongs to the maker. This maker does not provide buttons for doormen. It provides them for overcoats that cost more than a warehouse clerk earns in a year. And if a man wants a club crest on such buttons, he can order it. Money is persuasive." I blinked. "So we have two kinds of buttons?" "Yes," Wolf said. "One is a lure aimed at the Riverside Athletic Club. The other is a confession of the man who wore it. You're saying the killer wore a fancy overcoat and shed a button like a calling card." Wolf's eyes held mine. "I am saying someone wished us to see Riverside, and someone else wished to hide behind Riverside. The buttons argue with each other. Archie, that is useful." Fritz entered quietly, set a plate on the side table, and withdrew with the tact of a man who knows that argument is best served without an audience. Wolf ignored the food, which meant he was either deeply engaged or deeply offended. Both were possible. My phone rang. I picked it up. "Goodwin." Kramer's voice came through like gravel. "We got Rook." "And?" I asked. "And he's yelling," Kramer said. "He's yelling that he didn't do it. He's also yelling that if you and Wolf keep poking around, you'll get someone killed who matters." I looked at Wolf. "He's talkative." Kramer growled. "He's scared. That's different." Wolf lifted his head slightly. "Inspector." I held the receiver toward him. Wolf said, "Did your witness repeat his story?" Kramer snorted. He repeated it until I could recite it in my sleep. "Excellent," Wolf said. "Now test it." Kramer's voice tightened. "How?" Wolf replied, "Ask him to describe what he could not see." There was a pause. Then Kramer said suspiciously, "What the hell are you talking about?" Wolf's tone remained calm. The witness claimed he saw Eddie Rook run from the building seconds after the shot. That is plausible, but he also, I suspect, supplied details that his angle would not permit. Kramer grunted. "You weren't outside when he talked to us," Wolf said. "Number, but I have heard hundreds of witnesses. They rarely resist the temptation to embellish when they believe embellishment will be rewarded." Kramer muttered something and hung up. I lowered the phone and looked at Wolf. "You think the witness is planted?" Wolf's eyes narrowed. "We have one knock, one shot, one button, one anonymous call, one convenient suspect, one witness who supplies the last push. Count the signals, Archie. I counted. One knock, one shot, one planted witness, one fast arrest. Wolf nodded once. The pattern is too clean. It is being performed. I leaned back, felt the chair creak. So we catch the performer. Wolf's eyes remained calm. We catch the one paying for the performance. That was Wolf's favorite kind of criminal. Not the man who pulls the trigger, but the man who arranges the room so the trigger will be pulled by someone else. He looked at me. Archie, your feet are required. Of course they are, I said. Your brain always subcontracts. Wolf's mouth tightened slightly, which was either approval or a symptom of living with me. I went out. New York after midnight is a different city. The streets are quieter, but the quiet is not peaceful, it is watchful. The air smells of exhaust, wet stone, and stale ambition. People move faster, speak less, and keep their hands in their pockets, as if the pockets are safer than the world. Kramer had not given me the witness's name, but a uniform had. They always do if you ask the right way and look as if you belong. The witness was Harold Sennett, and he lived 3 blocks from Mercer Logistics in a walk, up that looked like it had once been optimistic. I did not go to his building. I went to the diner on the corner across from it, ordered coffee, and watched the street through a window that had been cleaned enough to suggest someone cared a little. Sennett appeared at 1:30, wearing the same knit cap and the same nervous posture. He looked around twice before he started walking. That is always a good sign. It means the man knows his role has an audience. I paid my bill and followed him. He walked fast, turning corners without reason, as if he had read a pamphlet titled How to Look Like You Are Not Being Followed. It did not work. Nervous men always broadcast their nervousness. Calm men are harder, which is why calm men are more dangerous. Sennett crossed 3rd Avenue, cut down an alley between 2 buildings, and emerged onto a side street where a dark sedan was parked with its engine idling. A man stepped out of the sedan. He was dressed well, not loud, but expensive in the quiet way. Dark overcoat, good shoes, gloves, a hat that sat at an angle that would not be tolerated by anyone who had ever worked honestly in the cold. He also had a careful limp, not dramatic, not an injury that demanded sympathy, a small hitch in the right leg that made you notice it if you were watching, and that made it seem accidental if you were not. The kind of limp that could be real or performed. The kind of limp that could be used to make people remember him later as harmless. Sennett approached him with the posture of a man approaching a priest. The limping man did not speak loudly. I could not hear the words from across the street, and I did not want to get closer. I wanted to see the exchange, not become part of it. Sennett held out his hand. The limping man reached into his coat pocket and placed something into Sennett's palm. The movement was smooth and discreet. Cash. Sennett's fingers closed around it fast, like a man grabbing warmth. He nodded once and stepped back. The limping man said something then because Sennett's face changed. It tightened and his eyes widened briefly. Then he nodded again harder, as if agreeing to something unpleasant. The limping man returned to the sedan and drove off. Sennett stood for a moment staring at the money in his hand, then stuffed it into his pocket and walked away quickly, shoulders hunched as if trying to outrun his own conscience. I waited until he was gone, then crossed the street and went to the spot where the sedan had been parked. The street was damp. The air smelled of oil and wet brick. There was nothing left behind except the faint trace of a tire pattern and the sense of having witnessed something you are not supposed to see. I did what I always do then. I made it someone else's problem. I went to a payphone, because even in this city, payphones still exist the way guilt exists, stubbornly and inconveniently, and I called Wolf. He answered on the first ring, as if he had been holding the receiver. Wolf's voice remained calm. By whom? A man in a dark overcoat, I said. Careful limp, clean look. Not a warehouse type. The kind of man who could sit on a club committee without sweating through his shirt. Wolf was silent for a moment, then said, The overcoat. Yes, I said. The limp matches the kind of man who wants to be remembered without being identifiable. Wolf's tone stayed mild. You observed the cash transfer. Clean as a bank deposit, I said. No envelope this time. Just money. Wolf said, Did you see his face? Not clearly, I admitted. Street light and a hat. But I saw enough. He moves like someone who does not fear being stopped. Wolf's voice sharpened slightly. Good, we have progressed from symbol to person. Do you want me to follow the limp? Wolf said. Return, we require thought, not pursuit. The limping man is confident. Confidence suggests he believes he is protected. I exhaled, annoyed, because my legs had finally found a useful target. All right, I'm coming back. Wolf added, Archie. Yes, do not confront the witness, Wolf said. He is a pawn. Pawns are often discarded. I thought of Sennett's face when the limping man spoke. It had not been the face of a man proud of what he had done. It had been the face of a man reminded of the price of changing his mind. I won't, I said. When I returned to the brownstone, Fritz was in the hallway, and his expression told me Wolf had been unpleasant while waiting. Wolf sat in the office, beer at hand, eyes narrowed at the evidence on his desk. He looked up as I entered. Report. I told him everything. The witness's route, the alley, the sedan, the careful limp, the cash, the way Sennett reacted as if he had been threatened or instructed again. Wolf listened without interruption. When I finished, he nodded once. Excellent, he said. Now we have a planted witness and a payer. And Eddie Rook, I said. Wolf's mouth tightened. Eddie Rook is the intended conclusion. The limping man is the author. The question remains. Why does he wish the police to arrest Eddie Rook quickly? To close the case, I said. Wolf shook his head. To close the wrong case, Mercer is dead, Hollis is nearly dead, and the club is the stage. The quick arrest creates comfort. Comfort produces neglect. He leaned back slightly, and his gaze drifted upward for a moment, toward the ceiling, toward the orchid rooms above, as if the plants might provide him with discipline. Then he looked back at me. Archie, we will see Mr. Sennett again. Invite him, I said. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Number, we will rescue him. I blinked. From what? A witness who accepts cash has two values. First, he helps convict an innocent man. Second, he becomes a liability. I sat down, feeling the fatigue in my shoulders. You think the limping man will tidy up? Wolf nodded. Yes. This criminal is fond of restraint. He knocks once, he shoots once, he pays once. He will not hesitate to eliminate what has become unnecessary. And the button, I said. The expensive overcoat. Wolf's eyes flicked to the maker's mark again. That button will lead us to a class of men, not a single man, but the limp will narrow the class. I frowned. How many rich men limp? Wolf's mouth tightened slightly. More than you think, fewer than exist in the Riverside Athletic Club's committee roster. I stared at him. You want the committee roster? Wolf nodded. Yes, I sighed. How do we get it? Wolf looked at me as if I had asked how to boil water. We ask for it politely with the implication that refusal will be unwise. And if they refuse, I said, Wolf's eyes narrowed, then we will ask in a manner that is less polite. My phone buzzed. A message from Kramer, brief and angry. Witness says Eddie wore a dark coat with brass buttons. How would he know? He was across the street. I showed it to Wolf. Wolf read it and nodded once. The slip, that's what I thought, I said. Wolf's voice was calm. Now the game is simple. They have attempted to lock the story. We will unlock it. He lifted his beer, took a slow sip and said, Archie, go to bed. I blinked. Bed. Yes, Wolf said. You require sleep. Tomorrow we will offend important men at an important club. We should be rested for it. I stood. And as I did, I felt the weight of the case settle into a shape. One knock, one shot, one witness, one limp. One attempt to make the police stop thinking. It almost worked. Almost is not good enough. when Nero Wolfe is in a room. Chapter 4. Kramer brought Eddie Rook to the brownstone because he hated doing it and because he hated being wrong more. That is the only reliable virtue in a policeman. Pride may be crooked, but it is sturdy. It was mid-afternoon, grey outside, the kind of day that makes the city look as if it has been rubbed with an eraser. Wolfe had finished with the orchids, had approved Fritz's lunch with a grunt, and was now planted in the red leather chair with a book open, but not truly being read. When Wolfe is waiting for a guest, he uses a book the way I use a cigarette, as a prop to keep impatience from showing. I opened the door to Kramer and his escort, and there was Eddie Rook in between them like a scrap of nervous energy pinned by two big hands. Eddie was short, wiry, and young enough to still believe he might talk his way into a different life. His eyes moved constantly, looking for exits, for angles, for anything that promised he would not be swallowed. Kramer grunted at me, "He wants to talk to your genius." Wolfe's voice floated from the office. "Inspector, enter." We went in. Eddie took one look at Wolfe and hesitated, as if he had expected a man with a badge instead of a man with a chair. Wolfe pointed to the red leather chair opposite him. "Sit." Eddie looked at Kramer. Kramer barked. "Sit." Eddie sat, perched forward like a runner ready to bolt. Wolfe regarded him as if assessing a tool. "You are Eddie Rook." Eddie's jaw tightened. "Yeah, you have been accused of shooting Grant Mercer." Wolfe said. Eddie's face twisted. "I didn't do it." Wolfe nodded once. "That is your claim. Provide your reason." Eddie blinked. "My reason. Why you did not do it," Wolfe said patiently. "Or if you prefer, why you were present." Eddie swallowed and glanced at Kramer. "You hear this? He talks like a judge," Kramer growled. "Answer him." Eddie exhaled hard. "I was there because I got a text." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "A text?" "Yeah," Eddie said quickly. "From a number I didn't know. I get jobs that way sometimes. A guy needs a package moved, a key picked up, a door watched. I'm not proud, I'm broke." Wolfe's tone stayed mild. "What did the text say?" Eddie hesitated as if reciting might make it real again. Then he said it, each word dropping like a coin. "1 job, 1 minute, 1 door." Kramer snorted. "Sounds like a riddle." Eddie shot him a look. "Sounds like a job. I figured it was some delivery. Quick in, quick out." Wolfe's gaze stayed steady. "Did it provide an address?" "Mercer Logistics," Eddie said. "Side, door 1205, 1 minute." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. 1 minute. Eddie nodded rapidly. "That's what it said. 1 minute, 1 door. Like I was supposed to open it, or close it, or just stand there. And you went," Wolfe said. Eddie spread his hands. "I went. I got there a little early. Side door was already open, lights on. I thought, okay, he's expecting me." Wolfe's voice remained calm. "You entered." Eddie shook his head hard. "Number I didn't. That's what I've been saying. I stayed outside. I looked in. I saw nobody. I heard a pop." Kramer leaned forward. "You heard the shot?" Eddie nodded, swallowing. "Yeah. Then I saw movement inside shadows. I panicked. I ran." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Toward the alley." Eddie stared at him. "How you know that?" Wolfe did not answer. He asked, "Did you see a man leave?" Eddie hesitated. "Number, I didn't see nobody. I just ran." Kramer's face tightened. "But the witness says he saw you running out." Eddie snapped. "Because he did. I ran. That don't mean I shot anybody." Wolfe said, "You were lured." Eddie blinked. "What?" "You were lured," Wolfe repeated. "Your presence was required to provide a convenient suspect, and your flight was required to provide a convenient narrative." Eddie's eyes widened. "So you believe me?" Wolfe's mouth tightened. "I believe your fear. It is sincere. Sincerity is not proof, but it is useful." Kramer grunted. "Wolfe, if you're turning him loose, you're crazy." Wolfe regarded Kramer. Inspector, you will not turn him loose. You will keep him alive. Kramer scowled. Alive. Wolf nodded. Yes, he is a liability to the man who arranged this. Liabilities are often removed. Eddie's face went pale. Removed, I said. He means killed, Eddie. Eddie's eyes darted to the door. I didn't ask for this. Wolf's voice was flat. No one does. Yet it arrives. He turned back to Eddie. The number that texted you, do you have it? Eddie swallowed, fished a cheap phone from his pocket, and held it out like a confession. I took it, scrolled, and read the number aloud. Wolf had me write it down. Kramer took it as if it offended him personally. Wolf said, "You will remain under police protection, Mr. Rook. If you attempt to flee, you will be punished twice. Once by the police, once by your employer." Eddie's jaw trembled. I ain't got an employer. Wolf's eyes narrowed. You have a payer. Do not be childish. Kramer stood, irritated. All right. I got what I need. He stays with me. Wolf nodded, as if dismissing a delivery. Inspector, before you depart, sit. Kramer hesitated, then sat with the posture of a man enduring a dentist. Wolf said, You will acquire the warehouse ledger found on Mercer's premises. Kramer blinked. The what? The ledger. Wolf repeated. The one with shipping entries Mercer kept separate from formal books. Kramer scowled. We took everything. Wolf's gaze was steady. Then you have it, produce it. Kramer's face reddened. I'm not handing evidence to you. Wolf's tone stayed mild. Then you will read it to me. Kramer glared at him for a long moment, then pulled a small notebook from his coat and flipped pages with a rough thumb. All right, Kramer snapped. There's a ledger. It's full of shipments coded as charitable deliveries, relief crates, donor goods, benefit transfer. It's dressed up, but the amounts are big and the routes are weird. Wolf's eyes narrowed. A shipping charity, Kramer grunted. That's what it looks like. It moves money, the way it moves crates. Quiet, uninspected, protected. Wolf's mouth tightened slightly. Protected by what? Kramer shrugged. By the word charity, by people who don't like questions. Wolf nodded once, satisfied. And Mercer was about to expose it. Kramer's eyes narrowed. How do you know that? Wolf's gaze drifted to the yellow pad I had copied earlier. Because he wrote Button Club, Hollis. He was connecting the transport mechanism to the social shield. Kramer scowled. You got a theory. Wolf's tone stayed calm. I have a structure. Mercer's business was logistics. His murder was logistical. He was killed at a time designed to create a rapid response and a rapid scapegoat. That suggests he was about to interfere with a larger flow. Kramer stood abruptly. I'll take that under advisement. That would be a novelty, Wolf murmured. Kramer growled something and hauled Eddie out. Eddie looked back once at Wolf, as if hoping Wolf could provide him with a safer life on the spot. Wolf does not provide safety. He provides truth. Safety is what you negotiate afterward. When they were gone, Wolf looked at me. Archie Saul Panzer. I already called him, I said. He's digging into Mercer's last calls. Wolf nodded. Good, and I wish you to obtain the roster of the Riverside Athletic Club's charity committee. I sighed. We are going to offend important men. Yes, Wolf said. We will do it efficiently. The phone rang. I grabbed it on the second ring. Goodwin, Saul Panzer said, voice calm as always, which is why I like Saul. Panic in this business is wasted motion. What do you have? I asked. Saul said. Mercer's last calls. There's a pattern. Short calls, mostly to numbers that route through intermediaries. But one name keeps appearing when I ask around, and it never appears on paper. Wolf leaned forward slightly. That was his version of interest, Saul continued. Clay Harker. I felt my shoulders tighten. The name had weight even if you did not know the man. Certain names in New York acquire gravity because people lower their voices around them. Wolf said into the receiver, Mr. Panzer, elaborate. Saul replied, "Nobody will write it down. Nobody will confirm it formally." But Mercer called a number that multiple people associate with Harker, not registered to him, not linked to him. But the same voice answers, the same men show up afterward. Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Interesting, continue," Saul said. "And another thing, Hollis. The man you found injured called Mercer. Twice in the last week. Both calls lasted under a minute." Wolf's voice stayed calm. 1 minute. One job. One door. I looked at Wolf. He had not forgotten Eddie's text. He never forgets a repeated phrase. "Repetition is a confession," Saul said. "If you want a description, I got one. Harker is known for doing everything once." I blinked. "Once." Saul's tone remained steady. "One warning. One favor. One punishment. People say you do not get a second mistake with him because he does not waste time repeating himself." Wolf's mouth tightened. "A man of restraint," Saul said. "Exactly." Wolf nodded once. "Thank you, Mr. Panzer. Remain available." Saul hung up. I sat back, feeling the shape of the case harden into something sharper. Clay Harker, a careful limp, an expensive overcoat, a man who pays a witness once and expects loyalty forever. Wolf said, "Archie, do you know him?" "I know of him," I said. "Which means I'm still alive." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "What is he?" "He's the kind of man who never raises his voice because he does not have to." Wolf nodded once. "And he does everything once." "That's the story," I said. Wolf's gaze moved to the brass button again, the maker's mark catching the desk lamp. Then he knocked once. "Archie." I frowned. "You think Harker sent the envelope?" Wolf's tone stayed mild. "Number Harker is the beneficiary. He would not invite us. He would avoid us. The envelope was sent by a frightened man attempting to survive. Hollis. He wished to place Wolf between himself and Harker." I said, "And Mercer." Wolf nodded. "Mercer was about to expose the shipping charity. Hollis warned him. Mercer contacted someone, perhaps Harker, perhaps an enemy of Harker. He was killed for it. The planted witness and the fast arrest are designed to close the case before it opens." I rubbed my face. "So now we open it." Wolf's eyes narrowed, satisfied. "Yes." "And we start?" I asked. Where Wolf leaned back, settled deeper into the chair, and looked as if he had been waiting all day to deliver the instruction. "At the club," he said, "and at the men who believe charity is a shield, bring me the roster. Archie, bring me the names of those who benefit from crates that move quietly and questions that never arrive." I stood. "Anything else?" Wolf's voice was calm. "Yes, if Clay Harker does everything once, do not force him to do something twice." "That's comforting," I said. Wolf's mouth tightened slightly. "It is practical." Outside, the city went on, pretending it had not been rearranged by one knock and one shot. Inside, the brownstone held its steady warmth, orchids above, Fritz below, and Nero Wolf in his chair, assembling a human machine from the tiny clicks of evidence. Clay Harker had entered the case without stepping through the door. That is how the dangerous ones do it. Chapter 5, the second one. Knock came at 4:17 in the afternoon, which proved two things. First, that whoever was knocking had learned the value of the gesture. Second, that fear does not consult schedules. I was at my desk, trying to pry a roster out of the Riverside Athletic Club with a phone call that was being received as if I had requested the chairman's liver, when the front door gave one sharp rap and then went silent. No second knock, no shuffle of feet, no polite waiting, just a single, restrained announcement. I looked at Wolf. He was in the red leather chair, eyes on his book, but the book was merely an accessory. His attention had shifted the instant the sound reached him. Wolf's ears are like his pride. They ignore most things until something challenges them. He said, "Archie." "Yes." "Attend." I went to the hall and opened the door fast. This time there was someone on the stoop. A young man, maybe 25, hair damp with sweat, despite the cold, cheeks pale, eyes wide and darting. He wore a cheap grey coat that had seen better winters and a knitted scarf wrapped too tight, like a tourniquet for anxiety. His hands were bare, and they shook. He looked as if he had been running from something that did not need to run to catch him. The moment he saw me, he blurted, "Is he here?" "Nero Wolfe," I said. "He's in there." "Who are you?" The man swallowed. "My name is Peter Doss. I'm a clerk, Mercer Logistics." That made the hair on my neck tighten. I stepped back. "Come in." He stepped over the threshold as if crossing it might change physics. His eyes flicked behind him once, then again, checking the street, checking corners. I closed the door, and he flinched at the sound as if it were a gunshot. I guided him to the office. Wolfe looked up as we entered, and his eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of a frightened young man in a cheap coat. "Mr. Wolfe," I said. "Peter Doss, clerk, Mercer Logistics." Wolfe's gaze stayed on Doss. "Sit." Doss did not sit. He hovered, hands half raised, as if unsure where to put them. "I can't," he said. "I can't stay." Wolfe's tone was mild. "You have already come. Remaining is a minor additional effort." Doss's eyes flashed. "You don't understand. They killed Mercer. They almost killed Hollis. They're going to kill anyone who talks." Wolfe's expression did not change. "Then talking is your only chance." Doss swallowed hard, glanced toward the window as if expecting a shadow to appear there. "I saw the ledger. I copied numbers. I was going to give them to Mercer, but he got scared. He said he was going to talk to someone at the club. He said he had one chance." Wolfe's eyes sharpened slightly. "One chance." Doss's head jerked. "Yeah, that phrase." He kept saying it, like it was the only thing keeping him standing. I said, "Who is they?" Doss's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, as if forcing a name through fear. "Clay Harker," he whispered. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "How do you know that name?" Doss swallowed. "Because I heard Mercer say it. Because I saw a number on Mercer's desk labeled CH, and because I saw a man in an expensive coat come in once. Not a warehouse coat. One of those city coats with brass buttons that shine like they're proud." Wolfe's gaze went to me for a fraction, then back. "Describe the man." Doss hesitated, then shook his head. "I can't. He didn't want to be seen. He kept to the door. He stood like he owned the air. He had a limp." That landed. I saw Wolfe's eyelids lower slightly. That was his version of an inward nod. Doss said quickly, "I have to get protection. You're Wolfe. You can do that. You can call the police. You can call Kramer." Wolfe's voice was calm. "The police are already involved." Doss's face tightened. "But they're chasing Eddie Rook." "Eddie didn't do it. Everyone knows Eddie didn't do it. They want Eddie. They don't want Harker." Wolfe nodded once. "Perhaps." Doss's breath came faster. "You don't understand. I came because I can't go to the police with this. They'll write it down and it will disappear. I need someone who doesn't write." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "I write. Not like them," Doss insisted. "You write to understand. They write to close." Wolfe studied him for a moment. "You have brought nothing." Doss blinked. "Nothing. No papers," Wolfe said. "No copies. No ledger pages. Only your fear." Doss swallowed. "I hid them. I hid the copies." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "Where?" Doss hesitated. His eyes flicked to the door again. "I'll tell you if you promise." Wolfe's tone was flat. "I promise nothing. I deliver what I can. Speak." Doss's hands clenched. "In the shipping office, behind the manifest cabinet, there's a loose panel. I put them there." Wolfe nodded once. "Good." Doss's eyes widened, hopeful. "So you'll protect me?" Wolfe's voice remained calm. "We will attempt to." Doss's face tightened. "Attempt, that's not good enough." At that moment, outside on West 35th Street, a siren rose and fell, close enough to make the front windows vibrate faintly. It was a patrol car cutting through traffic, probably chasing a ticket, probably chasing an argument, probably chasing nothing. The city does not need a reason to make noise, but Doss heard it like a verdict. His eyes went wide, his face drained, his breath caught. "They're here," he whispered. I said, "Easy. That's outside. Could be anything." Doss backed toward the door. Number, they found me. I knew it. I knew it." Wolf's voice snapped, sharp enough to cut. "Stop." Doss flinched, but the fear was stronger than Wolf's authority. He turned, bolted, and ran from the office as if the brownstone itself had caught fire. I lunged after him, but he was already in the hall, already fumbling at the front door like a man trying to escape a sinking ship. "Doss," I barked. "Don't be an idiot." He yanked the door open and sprinted down the stoop steps. I got to the threshold in time to see him vanish into the grey afternoon, shoulders hunched, head down, moving fast and erratic. Wolf's voice came behind me, calm again. "Archie, do not pursue." I stared at him. "He's going to get himself killed." Wolf nodded once. "Yes, that is why you must not make yourself his companion." I stood there a moment, fists clenched, and then closed the door with more force than necessary. Fritz appeared in the hallway, eyes questioning. "A frightened young man," I said. "And now he's gone." Fritz's mouth tightened, concerned. Fritz does not like fear in his house. He prefers it in sources where it can be controlled. Wolf said, "Call Saul Panzer. Tell him to go to Mercer Logistics and retrieve the copies from the manifest cabinet panel. Then call Inspector Kramer. Tell him the witness has become a target." I went to the office, grabbed the phone, and did both. Kramer answered with a growl. "What?" "A clerk from Mercer Logistics just came to the brownstone," I said. "Peter Doss. He's scared. He named Clay Harker. Then he bolted when he heard sirens. He's out on the street." There was a pause. Then Kramer's voice sharpened. "Doss, we got his name in the ledger inventory. Jesus. Wolf. You got him there." "Not anymore," I snapped. "He ran," Kramer swore. "All right, I'll put a car in the area. Where would he go?" "That's the trouble," I said. "Anywhere," Kramer muttered. "Keep your phone on," and hung up. Saul called back 15 minutes later. "I'm on it," he said. "But Archie, something else. Someone is watching the shipping office. A dark sedan driver with a hat. Doesn't look like a delivery guy." My stomach tightened. "Be careful." Saul's tone was calm. Always. An hour passed with the kind of tension that makes time feel like a wire being tightened. Wolf sat in his chair and drank beer as if the beer were the only thing keeping the world from collapsing. Fritz moved quietly as if sound might bring the wrong visitor. The phone rang again. This time it was Kramer, and his voice was not gravel, it was iron. "We found him," Kramer said. "Found who?" I asked, though I already knew. "Peter Doss," Kramer replied. "Under the Queensboro Bridge. Looks like he fell. Broken neck." I felt my jaw tighten. "Looks like." Kramer's voice was flat. "Staged. We'll call it panic and bad footing for the newspapers." But he didn't slip. He was placed. Wolf's eyes had narrowed, and he held still as if listening through my half of the call. I said, "Any witnesses?" "None who want to be." Kramer growled. "We got tire marks, that's all, and we got something else." I waited. Kramer said, "Fibers on his coat. Fine wool, high quality, and a brass button in his pocket. Not the Riverside uniform kind. The expensive kind. Same maker mark you talked about earlier." I looked at Wolf. He nodded once, as if the city had confirmed his opinion. Kramer continued, "So if you and Wolf have anything else, you better cough it up fast. Whoever is doing this is cleaning house." Wolf spoke, low but clear, close enough for the phone to catch his voice. "Inspector, the killer is editing the story." Kramer snorted. "Editing?" "Yes," Wolf said. "Trimming witnesses like excess words." There was a pause, the pause of a policeman hearing a metaphor and disliking that it makes sense. Kramer said, "All right, I'm coming over. You will not be welcome, Wolf replied. Kramer growled, too bad, and hung up. I set the phone down slowly for a moment. The office was quiet except for the city sound outside and the faint ticking of the clock. Wolf said, 2-1 knock events, 2 deaths. The second man died because he fled. I frowned. He died because someone wanted him dead. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Yes, but his flight made it convenient. Fear is useful to a planner. It creates its own explanations. I sat at my desk, feeling the anger settle into something colder. So now we've got a murdered warehouse owner and a murdered clerk, and the police are still holding Eddie Rook. Wolf's voice was calm. They will hold him until they are forced to release him. And we force them, I said. Wolf nodded once. We do. The front doorbell rang, and Fritz went to answer it. A moment later, Saul Panzer appeared in the office, coat dusted with sleet, face calm but eyes sharper. I got the copies, Saul said. 3 pages, ledger entries, names coded, but routes and amounts are clear. And Archie, the sedan watching the shipping office, followed me for 2 blocks, then peeled off when I turned onto a busy street. Wolf held out his hand. Saul gave him the pages. Wolf read them without moving anything but his eyes. His face remained composed, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. That was Wolf's version of displeasure at a clever criminal. He looked up. These shipments are not charity. They are laundering. Money moved as cargo, labeled as relief, protected by goodwill and ignorance. Saul nodded. That's how it reads. Wolf said, and the committee at Riverside provides the shield. Saul said, possibly, or at least the access. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Access is enough. He turned to me. Archie, the button. I retrieved the original expensive button, and the evidence bag Kramer had allowed me to keep. Wolf compared the maker marks, the thread remnants, the tiny pattern of stitching on the back. Saul leaned in. You can tell thread. Wolf's voice was flat. I can tell intention, he pointed. The same tailor, the same thread, the same hand behind both deaths. I frowned. So the limping man's coat brand matches the fibers on Doss's coat. Wolf nodded once. Meaning the man who paid the witness has been in contact with the clerk, or has used the same garment in both encounters, Saul said, or has men who dress alike. Wolf's eyes narrowed. A uniform of another kind. Fritz entered quietly. Inspector Kramer is at the door. Wolf's mouth tightened. Of course he is. Kramer entered 2 minutes later, coat half open, face flushed with cold and anger. He dropped into the yellow chair like a man dropping a burden. All right, Kramer growled. Now we got 2 bodies, and your clerk is dead, and Eddie Rook is still claiming he got a text, and now I got fibers and buttons and a phantom named Clay Harker. Wolf regarded him. Not phantom, planner. Kramer jabbed a finger at Wolf's desk. You got anything that ties Harker to Mercer? Wolf tapped the copied ledger pages. This ties Mercer to the laundering. Saul has a name that keeps appearing in Mercer's calls, Clay Harker. And now your dead clerk carried an expensive button, the same type that appeared at Mercer's office, the same type associated with a man who limps. Kramer stared. You're building a story. Wolf's tone stayed mild. Number, I am correcting 1. Kramer's jaw tightened. What's next? Wolf's eyes narrowed decisive. Now we compel Mercer Logistics to surrender its donor, routing records. Then we invite its principals to this house. Kramer blinked. Invite. Wolf nodded once. Yes, we will have an office gathering. Kramer scowled. You and your gatherings. Wolf's gaze was steady. Inspector, the killer is trimming witnesses. That means he is frightened of testimony. He is confident with bullets. He is not confident with conversation under scrutiny. Kramer stared at Wolf for a long moment, then grunted. All right, I'll get a subpoena. Wolf's mouth tightened slightly. Do so quickly. Restraint does not mean patience. Kramer stood, turned toward the door, then paused. His voice lowered a fraction. Goodwin, watch your back. I blinked. Coming from Kramer, that was almost tender. Wolf said, dryly, Inspector, Archie watches nothing else. When Kramer left, the brownstone settled again. Outside, the city continued its noisy indifference. Inside, Wolf sat in his chair, pages of the ledger on his lap, and the brass button gleaming under the lamp like a small, arrogant confession. He looked at me and said, "Archie, this is no longer a case of murder alone." I raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Wolf's eyes narrowed. "It is a case of control. Someone is attempting to decide what will be known, what will be believed, and who will remain alive to say it." He lifted the button slightly, and he does it once. I thought of Peter Doss, frightened on the stoop, begging for protection, then sprinting away from the sound of a siren that had nothing to do with him. One warning, one favor, one punishment. Wolf's voice was calm. "We will require him to repeat himself." I said, "That sounds dangerous." Wolf nodded once. "Yes." He reached for his beer. "And necessary." Chapter 6. I have never trusted riddles from people who do payroll. A poet has an excuse. A bookkeeper is supposed to deliver numbers that behave. When a bookkeeper starts speaking in puzzles, it means someone has paid him to forget arithmetic. Wolf sent me to see Mercer's bookkeeper at 10 in the morning, which was his way of reminding me that sleep is optional when logic is hungry. He remained in the brownstone, of course, because chairs are more reliable than sidewalks, and because his orchids were due for inspection at 11. "Do not argue," he told me as I was putting on my coat. "Acquire names, acquire roots, acquire the identity of Clay Harker's mechanism." "That's 3 acquires," I said. "You should charge by the verb." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Go." The bookkeeper's office was on Madison Avenue in a building with a lobby that smelled like disinfectant and ambition. The receptionist looked at me as if deciding whether my suit deserved to be admitted. She decided it did, probably because I smiled politely and did not mention Wolf's name. Wolf's name tends to make people either eager or defensive, and I preferred neutral. The bookkeeper was named Stanley Keene. He was in his late 50s, grey hair, smooth face, and eyes that were careful. His office was too neat, which is always a sign. Men who deal in money do not keep tidy desks unless they are hiding something or fear someone will look. He shook my hand with fingers that felt cold. "I knew Grant," I said, after the initial pleasantries. "I'm working for Nero, Wolf." Keene's mouth tightened slightly, almost an involuntary flinch. That was my first useful fact. "Mr. Mercer is dead," Keene said. "I read it." "You read the official story," I said. "I'm interested in the unofficial one, his books." Keene's eyes remained bland. "His books are with the police." "The police took what was on his premises," I said, "not necessarily what was kept elsewhere." Keene's hands folded precisely on his desk. "Mr. Mercer did not keep secret books." "That's interesting," I said, "because he had a ledger that did not match his formal records." Keene's eyes flicked. It was quick, but it was there. He recovered immediately and said, "A man in logistics has many lists." "I want the list that gets men killed," I replied. Keene's mouth tightened. "I can't help you." I leaned back slightly, letting silence do some work. Silence is an excellent lever with bookkeepers. They dislike loose ends. After a moment, Keene said, "Mr. Goodwin, if you are wise, you will let this matter rest." "That's funny," I said, "because 2 people who tried to let it rest are now lying down permanently." Keene's face did not change, but his eyes sharpened. He weighed something internally, as if deciding whether the price of speaking was higher than the price of refusing. Then he did not speak. He offered a riddle. "The man who knocks once," he said, voice low, "never needs a second chance." I stared at him. "That's your financial advice?" Keene's lips thinned. "It is what I have." "It sounds like a warning," I said. "It is," he replied. "For me?" I asked. "Or for him?" Keene's gaze held mine. "For anyone who thinks the first knock is an invitation." I stood up. "Mr. Keene, you are afraid." Keene's mouth tightened. "I am prudent." Wolf's word again. I walked to the door, then paused and looked back. Did Mercer pay you for services that were not accounting? Keen's eyes did not move. Number did he ask you about a shipping charity? I asked. A program that moves money, like it moves crates. Keen's jaw tightened. Mr. Goodwin. That's a yes without the syllables, I said. Keen's eyes were cold now. Leave. I left. On the way out, the receptionist did not look up. That was another fact. People who are paid to be polite look up. People who are paid to ignore do not. In the cab back to the brownstone, I replayed Keen's riddle until I was sick of it. The man who knocks once never needs a second chance. It fit Clay Harker's reputation too neatly to be coincidence. It also fit Wolf's growing list of patterns. One knock at our door, one shot at Mercer. One brick, perhaps, if the criminal wished to revise the punctuation. When I reached the brownstone, Wolf was in the office with Saul Panzer, the two of them in their usual arrangement. Wolf seated, Saul standing. Both of them looking as if the world outside was a rumor. "Your port," Wolf said. I gave it. The neat office, Keen's careful eyes, the refusal to speak, the riddle. Wolf's eyes narrowed slightly as I quoted it. "The man who knocks once never needs a second chance," Wolf repeated. Saul said. "That's Clay Harker's legend." Wolf's gaze shifted to Saul. Legend is often a tool. Saul nodded. "So is fear." Wolf looked back at me. "Keen will not speak because he believes Harker will not forgive a first betrayal. Very well. We will not rely on Keen." I sat down at my desk. "So what do we rely on?" Wolf said. "We rely on the pattern. We count it until it reveals its author." That was Wolf's version of comfort. Night arrived early because winter in New York believes in efficiency. Fritz served dinner. Wolf ate with the satisfaction of a man who still believes civilization exists. And I tried to pretend my nerves were not stretched thin by the thought of a killer who does everything once. At 9:47, the house was quiet. Wolf had returned to his chair. Fritz had retreated to the kitchen. I was at my desk, sorting the ledger copies Saul had retrieved, making columns in my head because paper did not deserve the honor of my handwriting yet. Then the front door knocked. On one sharp rap, like a period at the end of a sentence. I froze. My pen hovered above the notepad. Wolf did not move. He did not even lift his eyes from the book. He said calmly, "Archie." I swallowed. "Yeah, attend," Wolf said. I went to the hall, my pulse loud in my ears. I opened the front door quickly, because if you hesitate, you give fear time to decorate itself. No one stood there. The stoop was empty. The street was quiet. A cab rolled by and did not slow. A pedestrian on the far sidewalk kept walking, hands in pockets, head down. I stepped out and looked both ways. Nothing. I came back in and closed the door, carefully. I stood there a moment, listening silence. Then, the brick came through the front window. It hit with a crash that made the whole house jump. Glass exploded inward. The brick bounced once on the hall floor and skidded to a stop, leaving a scrape like a sneer. Fritz shouted from the kitchen, "Mr. Wolf." Wolf's voice floated from the office, calm as ever. "Remain where you are, Fritz." I bent down, grabbed the brick, and saw the note tied to it with twine. My hands felt steady, which annoyed me because I knew that steadiness meant my fear had gone deep instead of loud. I carried the brick into the office. Wolf looked up then, not startled, not alarmed, merely attentive, as if I had delivered the mail. I placed the brick on his desk and untied the note. It was a strip of paper, torn from something larger, with block letters written in thick, marker stop counting. I read it aloud. Wolf regarded it, then made a small sound of contempt. He reached for a pencil, the yellow one he uses when he intends to insult someone without raising his voice. He wrote beneath the message in neat handwriting. "Too late." He handed it to me. "Place it in the file," Wolf said. I stared at him. "Summonet just threw a brick through your window." Wolf's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, I will charge for it." "Do you want me to call Kramer?" I asked. Wolf shook his head. Number Kramer will come anyway. Sirens attract the nervous. Also, our adversary is already using sirens. Fritz entered cautiously, face pale with anger. Fritz does not like broken glass. It offends his sense of household order. Wolf said, Fritz, kindly see to the window. Do not cut yourself. I would find it inconvenient. Fritz's mouth tightened. Yes, sir. He left. I looked at the note again. Stop counting. That means we're counting right. Wolf nodded. Yes. So we keep counting, I said. Wolf's gaze was steady. Of course, that is why the note is amusing. I started to say something else, but the phone rang. It was Kramer. I picked up. Goodwin. Kramer's voice was rough. You got trouble. I got a brick, I said. Kramer growled. I heard patrol called it in. You want a squad car on your stoop. I want you to listen, I said. Kramer snorted. That'll be the day. What? I said. Someone knocked once at our door, then threw a brick with a note telling Wolf to stop counting. There was a pause, then Kramer's voice lowered. Wolf's right. Somebody's playing you. He's playing you too, I snapped. You got someone feeding your squad helpful certainty. Kramer was silent, long enough to tell me I had hit something tender. Then he said, grudgingly, Yeah, I blinked. Yeah. Kramer's voice was tight. I got a captain over at the precinct. Good man, he admitted something he shouldn't have. Somebody keeps calling in tips, not anonymous crank tips. Helpful tips, names, times, directions. Stuff that makes the boys feel like they're getting ahead. Wolf lifted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. He had been listening to my side and reading my face. Kramer continued, and the tips all point the same way. Eddie Rook street-level guys, easy collars, quick closures. I said, and someone wants you to stop counting too. Kramer growled. Yeah, my captain said. It feels like someone's been handing them certainty from the shadows. Wolf spoke, low but clear, close enough for the phone to catch. Inspector, certainty is the cheapest bribe. Kramer snorted. Yeah, well, it's working. Half my squad likes it, they don't have to think, Wolf said. Do they know who supplies it? Kramer's voice tightened. Number, but the calls route through switchboards. Hard to trace. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Of course. Kramer sighed. And for Kramer that counts as vulnerability. Wolf, you got any solid connection to Clay Harker? Give it to me. I can't arrest a legend. Wolf's tone stayed mild. You will not arrest him yet. You will expose him. Kramer grunted. How? Wolf said. Bring me your captain. Tomorrow. Here. Kramer hesitated. He won't like that. Wolf's voice hardened slightly. He will prefer it to being manipulated. Kramer muttered a curse. All right. I'll see what I can do. He hung up. I set the receiver down and looked at Wolf. You want the captain here? Wolf nodded once. Yes, an officer who admits being fed certainty is an officer who might still be salvageable. I looked at the broken window, the taped outline of where glass had been. We're getting close. Wolf's eyes were calm. Number, we are being told we are close. That is different. Our adversary wishes to control our pace. I frowned. So we slow down. Wolf shook his head. We proceed properly. And properly is? I asked. Wolf tapped the brick gently with a fingertip, as if it were a specimen. We keep counting. We count calls. We count buttons. We count witnesses removed. We count who benefits from certainty. And we count, most of all, who does everything once. He looked at me, and for a moment there was something almost like satisfaction in his eyes. Archie, Wolf said, the man who knocks once believes. He never needs a second chance. We will oblige him. How? I asked. Wolf's voice was calm. We will give him one chance to speak in this office under scrutiny. I felt my mouth tighten, and if he doesn't take it? Wolf shrugged slightly. Then he will do what he always does once, and we will be ready. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere down the avenue. Not for us. Not even about us, but it sounded like the city's laughter. Inside, Fritz swept glass with quiet anger, and Wolf sat in his chair with a brick on his desk and a corrected threat in his pencil. Too late. I went back to my ledger pages and kept counting, because that is what you do when someone tells you to stop. Chapter 7. Saul Panzer does not like drama. He likes facts that sit still and let you measure them. That is why he is useful in a city where most facts try to run away. He arrived at the brownstone the next morning with snow on his shoulders and a file in his hand. Fritz took his coat, and Saul came into the office with the calm of a man delivering groceries instead of danger. Wolf eyed him. "Mr. Panzer." Saul nodded. "I have what you asked for." "You have more," Wolf said. Saul's mouth tightened slightly. "Yes." That was Saul's version of enthusiasm. He handed Wolf the file. Wolf did not open it immediately. He never rushes the evidence. He lets it wait to show respect, Saul said. "Clay Harker's limp is real." Wolf's eyebrows lifted slightly. "From what?" "Dock accident," Saul replied. 10 years ago, he was on a pier in Red Hook. A container shift, he got pinned. No lawsuit, no publicity. The kind of accident that gets settled quietly if the man involved prefers quiet. Wolf nodded once. "And his money?" Saul's eyes were steady, consulting. I snorted. "Of course." Saul continued. "He runs it through entities that shift names the way a man shifts hats. There's a security firm, a logistics advisory group, and a charitable compliance service. None of them file taxes in any clean way. He does not leave receipts. He does not leave invoices. His wealth is visible only through purchases made by other men for him." Wolf's gaze sharpened. "Proxies," Saul nodded. "Drivers, assistants, middlemen." Wolf leaned back slightly. "Restraint," Saul said. "Yes, he avoids paper. He avoids proof." Wolf's mouth tightened. "That is consistent. Proof is a second knock." I blinked, then grinned despite myself. "You're using his metaphor against him." Wolf gave me a look that suggested I had applauded too loudly in a library. "It is not his metaphor. It is mine." Saul looked at me. "Archie, you asked me to identify his driver." "I did," I said. "Because drivers do the errands that bosses pretend they never requested." Saul nodded. "His driver is named Dennis Vale. He uses a dark sedan registered to a shell company. Vale is cautious, but not clever. Yesterday afternoon, after your brick came through the window, he went to a men's clothier on Madison." Wolf's eyes narrowed slightly. "The overcoat." Saul nodded. "The same brand as the brass button maker Mark. He bought one, paid cash, refused a receipt, wouldn't even let the clerk wrap it with the store name showing. He carried it out like contraband." I felt my shoulders tighten. "You saw this." Saul's expression stayed calm. "I had a man watching him." Wolf nodded once. "Good," I said. "So the button is not just a clue. It's their uniform, their preferred costume." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "It is their preferred denial. The coat is expensive. Therefore, it suggests status. It also suggests the wearer is not expected to be searched. But the button is the tell, because status can be purchased, and so can tailoring." Saul added. "The clerk at the store said Vale bought 2 similar coats last year. Same cash, same refusal of receipt." Wolf's gaze sharpened. "A pattern?" "Yes," Saul said. "Precision." Wolf nodded slowly. "Eddie's phone record shows the lure text did not come from a normal handset. It routed through a private relay service." I frowned. "Relay service?" Saul nodded. "A message forwarding system used by people who want to send instructions without showing their own number." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "And the client?" Saul's voice stayed calm. "Only one client uses that relay in the way Eddie's message was sent. The relay is contracted by Harker's security firm." I let out a slow breath. That was not proof in court, but it was proof in Wolf's universe, which often arrives before the court catches up. Wolf's mouth tightened slightly, pleased. So the text was routed through his own mechanism. Saul nodded. Yes, the phrase was not random either. One job, 1 minute, one door. It fits the habit. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Everything once, I said. And no receipts. Wolf looked at me. Receipts are second Knox Archie proof. He avoids proof because proof can be used against him. Saul said. He avoids taxes too. There's no filing that links him to any of it. No pay stubs, no checks, just cash and favors and threats. Wolf leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Now we have 3 converging threads. A planted witness paid by a limping man, a button from an expensive coat brand, and a relay used by the security firm, I said. Enough to bring him in. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Not yet, enough to require him to respond. Saul looked at Wolf. He won't come willingly. Wolf's voice was calm. Then we will invite him in a way he cannot ignore. I raised an eyebrow, like a one knock. Wolf's mouth tightened, precisely. Saul's gaze sharpened. That could be dangerous. Wolf nodded once. Yes, I said, so we make him think we have proof. Wolf's eyes narrowed. We do. Saul looked at me. Do we? Wolf's gaze was steady. We have enough proof to cause him to act. That is sufficient. When a man avoids second knocks, he will react violently to the threat of a receipt. I sat back, thinking of the brick, and the note, stop counting, too late. The man had already reacted, and that meant Wolf's pressure was working. The phone rang, and this time it was not Kramer. It was the police captain Kramer had mentioned, a man whose voice carried the clipped authority of someone used to being obeyed. This is Captain Belling, he said. Inspector Kramer says you wanted to speak. Wolf lifted his head. I held the receiver toward him, Wolf said. Captain, you have been receiving helpful certainty. There was a pause. Then the captain's voice tightened. We receive tips. Wolf's tone was mild. You receive guidance. That is different. The captain's breath was audible. What do you want? Wolf replied. I want the source. The captain hesitated. We can't trace it cleanly. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Number, but you can trace its effect. Which men receive the calls, which men repeat them, which men feel grateful. Then the captain said, reluctantly, yes. Wolf's voice stayed calm. You will come to my house this afternoon and speak in my office. You will bring Inspector Kramer. You will bring no more than 2 men. If you bring more, I will send you away. The captain sounded irritated. You don't give orders to the police. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Then do not come. Continue accepting certainty from the shadows. It will ruin your squad, and it will ruin you. Eventually, it will ruin someone's life permanently, which should concern you if you still believe you wear a badge. Silence. Then Captain Belling said, grudgingly, all right, this afternoon. Wolf said, good. He hung up. Saul watched Wolf. You think the police are compromised? Wolf's voice was calm. Not compromised. Nudged. The gentlest corruption is convenience. A man who avoids receipts understands convenience. I said, so we create inconvenience. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Yes, for Harker, Saul asked. How? Wolf's gaze drifted upward for a moment, toward the ceiling, toward the orchid rooms above, where things bloom honestly because they have no choice. Then he looked back at us. We will invite Clay Harker, Wolf said, to prove he does not need a second knock. I felt my mouth tighten. And if he answers with a brick? Wolf's tone stayed mild. Then we will correct his spelling again. Saul's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. You are serious? Wolf nodded once. Yes, the story is being edited. We will become the editor. Outside, the snow thickened, and the city moved on. Inside, the brass button lay on Wolf's desk like a small, bright confession, and Wolf sat in his chair planning a knock that would be heard by. A man who prides himself on never hearing things twice. Chapter 8. Wolf does not like traps that depend on muscle. He prefers traps that depend on vanity, because vanity is the one human weakness that will show up on time and bring its own identification. The trouble with Clay Harker, if you accepted Saul's file and half the city's whispers, was that he did not do sloppy, he did not do public, he did not do second chances. That meant that if we wanted him to move where we could see him, we had to offer something he could not allow to remain unattended proof. Or rather, the threat of proof. Wolf arranged it the way he arranges everything, from his chair. At 3 o'clock Captain Belling came to the brownstone with Inspector Kramer, and the two of them sat in Wolf's office, while Wolf spoke in the calm tone that makes police officers itch. Belling was the kind of man who had earned his authority by being difficult to impress. He had a square jaw, a tired gaze, and the reflexive suspicion of anyone who steps into Wolf's brownstone and feels the house judging him. Wolf did not waste time. "Captain," Wolf said, "your squad has been receiving helpful certainty. The source is a man who avoids proof and uses your appetite for closure as a tool." Belling's mouth tightened. "You think this is a corruption case?" "I think it is an exploitation case," Wolf corrected. "Corruption implies consent." "Your men are being guided, not paid," Kramer grunted. "Told you." Belling shot him a look, then looked back at Wolf. "You got a name?" Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Clay Harker." Belling's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's a rumor, not a name." Wolf's voice stayed mild. "Rumors often have addresses." Kramer leaned forward. "We got no charges. We got buttons and whispers and a dead warehouse owner." Wolf nodded once. "Therefore we create a situation in which Mr. Harker reveals himself." Belling's gaze sharpened. "You mean bait?" Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Yes. A bait that does not involve entrapment, only curiosity. We will leak a claim that Grant Mercer hid a second ledger." Kramer scowled. "Leaking is my job." Wolf looked at him. "Inspector, you leak accidentally. I leak deliberately." Kramer made a sound of disgust. Belling asked, "Second ledger where?" Wolf's voice was calm. "In a storage unit tied to the shipping charity, a unit rented under a name that can be traced, but not easily. Enough to make Harker believe Mercer still possesses proof that could ruin his operation." Kramer frowned. "Mercer's dead." Wolf nodded. "Yes. That is why the ledger, if it exists, is now uncontrollable. That is what will lure him. Dead men do not negotiate. Dead men leave evidence lying around for others to trip over." Belling's eyes narrowed. "And you think Harker will go for it personally?" Wolf's mouth tightened. "If he is as proud of doing everything once as the whispers claim, he will not trust this to an underling. Proof is not a task for hired hands. It is a task for the man who fears it," Kramer said. "And what do you want from us?" Wolf's gaze was steady. "I want you to allow Archie to watch, quietly, without uniforms, without your men blundering in and scaring the prey away." Kramer bristled. "Blundering." Wolf ignored him. "If Mr. Harker enters that unit, we will have a physical act tied to the rumor. We will have the one knock. We will have foreknowledge." Belling exhaled slowly. "All right. We'll give you room. But if you get yourself killed, I'll deny knowing you." Wolf nodded once. "That would be prudent." The leak went out the way Wolf wanted it to. Not through a newspaper, not through a police bulletin. Through a channel that carried gossip to men who prefer whispers over headlines. Wolf used a club man he had once embarrassed. A man who still answered Wolf's calls, because embarrassment is a bond stronger than friendship. By 6 o'clock, Saul had confirmed the rumor had moved. By 8, a man associated with the shipping charity had asked an uncomfortable question in the wrong bar. By 9, someone had checked storage unit records at a facility on the edge of Long Island City. Wolf sat in his chair and said, "He will go," I said, "and I will be there." Wolf nodded once. "Yes, Archie, bring a flashlight and your caution. Leave your heroism." "Noted," I said. At 10:30, I was in a borrowed sedan, parked across from the storage facility. It was a plain place, rows of metal doors under harsh lights, fenced and monitored by a bored security guard who looked like he had been hired because he could sit still without thinking. I had a visitor pass, courtesy of Captain Belling's cooperation, and a small lie that said I was retrieving estate documents. In this business, estate documents can mean anything from jewelry to regret. The air was cold enough to make my breath visible. The facility lights made the ground look bleached. The silence was broken only by distant traffic and the occasional clank of a gate shifting in the wind. I waited. At 11:17, a dark sedan rolled in slowly, headlights off until the last moment. It moved with caution, the way a man moves when he does not want to be remembered. It parked 2 rows away from the unit number Wolf had provided. A man got out. He wore an expensive overcoat, dark and well cut, the kind that makes you look important even when you are standing in a field of metal doors. His hat was low, his hands were gloved. He moved with a careful limp. My pulse did not spike. It settled. There is a difference. A spike is fear, a settling is certainty. He walked down the row with unhurried confidence, counting door numbers as if he already knew where he was going. When he reached the unit, he paused. He lifted his hand, and he knocked once on the metal door, not hard, not loud, a small restrained tap like habit. I exhaled slowly. Wolf had been right, not just about the man, about the gesture. One knock was not merely a signal, it was a signature, a ritual performed to reassure himself that he was still the one controlling the sentence. Then he produced a key. He did not jiggle the lock. He did not test. He slid the key in and turned it smoothly, as if he had done it before. Foreknowledge, not luck. He rolled the door up partway and slipped inside. I waited 3 seconds, then got out of my car and moved quickly but quietly down the row. My shoes made small crunching sounds on the gravel. I kept my hands in my coat pockets, one hand wrapped around the small revolver I had borrowed from Kramer, with the promise that I would not use it unless forced. I reached the door and listened. Inside, the man moved among boxes. I heard cardboard shift. I heard a metal scrape. He was searching with efficiency, not curiosity. That meant he expected something specific. I stepped to the opening and said, "Good evening." The man froze. For a fraction of a second he did not turn. Then he turned slowly, and I saw his face more clearly under the harsh facility light spilling in, middle-aged, clean-shaven, eyes sharp and cold, the face of a man who had practiced being pleasant and decided it was optional. His right hand was inside his coat. Mine was already on my revolver, still in my pocket, not drawn. I said, "You're in the wrong unit." His eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "Archie Goodwin," I said. "I work for Nero Wolfe." The name hit him. It did not make him flinch, but it did change the angle of his gaze, the way a man's eyes change when a chess piece appears where it shouldn't. He said, "I don't know what you mean." I smiled slightly. "Sure you do. You knocked once." His mouth tightened. He glanced toward the row entrance, toward the office building where the board guard sat. He was calculating. Men like this always calculate. I said, "Before you move, you should know there are police nearby." That was a lie in the immediate sense, because Belling had agreed to keep uniforms away. But it was true in the larger sense, because Kramer had men within driving distance, and truth is sometimes a rubber band. The man's eyes flicked again, and his hand inside his coat shifted. I said, "Don't be dramatic, we're just talking." He smiled then, and the smile was small and pleasant. "Talking is for people who want something." "I want to know," I said, "why you have a key to a unit you don't rent." His smile vanished. He moved. He lunged toward the opening, shoulder low, as if trying to force past me. I stepped aside and grabbed at his coat sleeve. The fabric was expensive and tough, and my fingers caught on something, a button. It popped loose in my hand. At the same moment his hand came out of his coat holding a gun. It reacted the way my body reacts when it has been trained by a lifetime of bad decisions. I slammed my forearm against his wrist, shoved the gun down, and kicked his shin hard enough to make his limp, momentarily irrelevant. The gun clattered to the gravel outside the unit, skidding under the fluorescent light like an accusation. The man cursed, not loudly, because restraint, but with genuine anger. Then he ran. He ran with that careful limp, turning it into speed by sheer force of will, cutting down the road toward the facility gate. He did not look back. He did not waste motion. He ran like a man who believes getting caught once is the beginning of death. I did not chase him far. Wolf had told me to leave heroism at home. Instead, I grabbed the fallen gun with my handkerchief and pocketed it, because a gun is not a hero's trophy. It is evidence. Then I looked at my hand. In my palm was the brass button I had torn loose. It was identical to the others. Same maker's mark, same thread remnants, same arrogance in its shine. I bent and looked where the gun had fallen. Something else glinted in the gravel. Another brass button, dropped in his haste. This one had been torn off earlier, perhaps from the scuffle, perhaps from his own movement. Either way, it lay there like a punctuation mark. 2 buttons. A man who does everything once had left proof twice. That was not carelessness. That was urgency. I went back to my car, heart pounding, now that the moment had passed and my body had permission to feel it. I called Wolf. He answered immediately. Yes. He came, I said. Expensive coat limp, knocked once on the unit door like it was religion. Opened it with a key, went inside. I confronted him. He ran. Wolf's voice stayed calm. Did he leave anything? A gun, I said, and 2 brass buttons. There was a pause. Then Wolf said softly, "Excellent." "Excellent," I repeated. "He just pulled a gun on me." Wolf's tone remained mild. "Yes, and you are alive, that is excellent." I looked at the storage unit again, the metal door half raised, the boxes inside disturbed. The ledger Wolf had invented was not there, of course, but the man's behavior had been the ledger we needed. "He had a key," I said. "Foreknowledge." Wolf's voice sharpened slightly. "That is the proof he avoids. It is now in our possession." I swallowed. "He's going to be angry," Wolf said. "He is already angry. That is why he threw a brick. Now he will be frightened." "You think so?" I asked. Wolf's voice was calm, almost satisfied. "Yes, because he has done something twice. He has left proof. He will attempt to correct that error," I said. "What do you want me to do now?" Wolf replied. "Return, bring the gun and the buttons and Archie." "Yes." "Do not drive directly home," Wolf said. "Make turns, count your mirrors. A man who knocks once does not tolerate being forced to repeat himself." I looked around the empty rows of metal doors, the harsh lights, the bored guard in his little office, and the cold night air that made my breath look like smoke. "Too late," I said quietly. Wolf's voice remained calm. "Yes, too late. Now, come home." Chapter 9. If you want to see a room full of adults revert to childhood, put them in Nero Wolf's office and let them realize he knows more than they do. By 5 o'clock we had them. Not all of them willingly. The unwilling ones always arrive with the most interesting expressions. Wolf sat in the red leather chair with the serenity of a man who has already eaten and already decided the outcome. Fritz moved silently in the background, setting out glasses of water as if hydration might prevent stupidity. Saul Panzer stood near the wall with his hands folded, looking like a polite shadow. I had my usual chair behind my desk, which gave me the advantage of watching faces without being obliged to be courteous. Inspector Kramer arrived first, dragged by duty and irritation. Captain Belling came with him, posture stiff, expression controlled, as if he were in a room where the furniture might testify. Harold Sennett, the witness, was brought in next, escorted by a plainclothes man, his knit cap crushed in his hands. He looked like a man who had discovered that the money he took had purchased him more fear than groceries. Stanley Keene, Mercer's bookkeeper, came in after that, and he looked exactly the way he had looked in his office. Neat, careful, bland. His suit was pressed, his hair precise, his eyes wary. Men like Keene believe neatness is armor. Clay Harker was brought in last. He did not come in handcuffs. He did not come in a patrol car on his own terms. He was escorted in, but he carried himself as if he were attending a meeting he had scheduled, not one he had been compelled to attend. He wore an expensive overcoat with brass buttons that caught the light. His hat was immaculate. His gloves were new. His limp was there, controlled and unhurried, as if he had decided it was part of his identity. His face was calm, not pleasant, not hostile, polished stone. He looked at Wolf and said, evenly, "Mr. Wolf." Wolf nodded once. "Mr. Harker, sit." Harker sat in the red leather chair, as if the chair owed him rent. Kramer stared at him with the expression of a man who wants to punch a fact. "You know why you're here." Harker's eyes flicked to Kramer. "I was told there was a misunderstanding." Wolf's voice was calm. "There is no misunderstanding. There is a structure. You will listen." Harker's mouth tightened slightly. "I do not take orders." Wolf regarded him. "Then you will take consequences." Harker's gaze held Wolf's for a moment. Then he leaned back, composed. Wolf looked at Captain Belling. "Captain, you have admitted your squad has been fed certainty. You will listen, and you will recognize the mechanism." Belling's jaw tightened. "I'm listening." Wolf looked at Harold Sennett. "Mr. Sennett, you were paid to identify Eddie Rook as the fleeing gunman." Sennett swallowed. "I saw him." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "You saw him run. You did not see him shoot, yet you described his coat buttons. You described what you could not observe from your angle. You were coached." Sennett's face reddened. His eyes flicked to Harker. "Then away," Wolf said. "Mr. Keene." Keene's mouth tightened. "I do not know why I am here." Wolf's voice stayed mild. "Because you chose to offer riddles instead of numbers. You warned Archie that the man who knocks once never needs a second chance. You will explain why you feared that man." Keene sat very straight. "I have clients. I must be discreet." Wolf nodded. "Discretion is admirable when it serves decency. Yours serves fear." Keene did not answer. His lips pressed together. Wolf turned his gaze to Harker again. "Now, Mr. Harker, you have been described as a man of restraint. One warning, one favor, one punishment, one knock." Harker's expression did not change. "People say many things." Wolf nodded. "Yes, and you encourage them because it is efficient." Harker's eyes stayed calm. "Get to your point." Wolf did. He held up the plain envelope from the first knock, the one I had found on the stoop. He did not touch it directly. He used a handkerchief, because Wolf prefers not to smear his own fingerprints onto someone else's lies. "This envelope," Wolf said, "arrived at my door with a single knock. It contained a time and an address and a brass button. It was intended to lure me from my house." Harker's gaze remained steady. "You went. That is your choice." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Yes, and that is the point. The envelope was not intended merely to lure me. It was intended to measure my response. Someone watched my house. Someone wished to confirm my absence. Someone wished to know whether my brownstone would be empty and whether my routine could be manipulated." Captain Belling shifted slightly. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Sennett's breathing sped up. Wolf continued, voice calm and methodical. "At the address, we found Calvin Hollis injured. He directed us to Mercer Logistics. When we arrived, Grant Mercer was dead. The police arrived quickly because an anonymous call summoned them at precisely the correct moment. A witness was ready with a name, Eddie Rook." Kramer's jaw tightened. "We still got him in custody." Wolf nodded once. "Yes, because the plan required a fast guilty. A convenient ending. Eddie Rook was lured by a text. One job, 1 minute, 1 door. He arrived. He fled, and therefore he became plausible." Belling's mouth tightened. "And you think someone fed my men that certainty?" Wolf's gaze was steady. "I do not think. I observe your men received tips that made their work easier. Those tips were designed to make them stop thinking." Belling exhaled slowly. "Go on." Wolf's eyes moved to Keene. Grant Mercer was about to testify, not in court, to someone who could destroy the shipping charity's protection. Keene's face tightened, the first real crack. "I do not know what you mean." Wolf's voice stayed mild. "Yes, you do. Mercer was going to expose a charitable shipping mechanism that moved money, like it moved crates. Quiet, uninspected, protected by goodwill. You handled numbers. You saw the irregularities. You feared the man behind them." He glanced at Harker again, and that glance was all the confession Wolf needed. Wolf turned back to Harker. "Mr. Harker, you benefited from that shipping charity. The label charity provides immunity from inspection, and the committee provides access." Harker's face remained calm. "You have no proof?" Wolf nodded. "You avoid proof. That is why you refuse receipts." Harker's eyes narrowed slightly. The first sign of irritation. Wolf continued. "You paid Mr. Sennett to identify Eddie Rook. Archie observed the cash transfer. You used your driver to purchase an overcoat brand with brass buttons, paying cash, refusing receipts, because receipts are second Knox proof." Harker's mouth tightened. "This is rhetoric." Wolf's eyes were cold. "Number it is precision." "I stood and opened the desk drawer. I removed the gun and the 2 brass buttons I had brought from the storage unit, each sealed in a bag. I handed them to Wolf without comment. Wolf lifted the first button, held it up between thumb and forefinger, and spoke to the room. "Mr. Harker," Wolf said, "you deny involvement. Then explain these." Harker's gaze flicked to the buttons and returned to Wolf calm. "Buttons." Wolf nodded. 2 brass buttons, taken last night from a storage unit in Long Island City. The unit was bait. We leaked a false claim that Mercer hid a second ledger there. A man arrived, wearing an expensive coat, limping, and knocked once on the metal door, as if it were habit. He opened it with a key he should not have possessed. That demonstrates foreknowledge. Harker's eyes narrowed a fraction. "You claim a man." Wolf's voice stayed calm. "I claim you." Harker's lips thinned slightly. "You have nothing that ties those buttons to me." Wolf's gaze sharpened. "On the contrary, the tailor's mark on the back ties them to a specific coat order, a custom coat order." Harker's eyes remained steady. "Many men buy coats," Wolf nodded. "Yes, but not many buy them without receipts. Not many buy them through drivers, and not many have a tailor who keeps records for fittings." Harker's calm shifted. "Not much. Just enough to tell me he had felt the edge of something sharp." Wolf looked at Saul, Mr. Panzer. Saul stepped forward and placed a sheet of paper on Wolf's desk. It was an invoice copy, not a receipt, but a tailor's internal order form. It had a coat brand, a style code, and a handwritten note about a right leg alteration to accommodate a limp. Wolf held it up so the room could see. "This is the tailor's mark and order record. It includes the requested adjustment for a right leg. It includes the button maker mark. It includes the purchaser's proxy, Dennis Vale, acting for Clay Harker's security firm." Harker's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to Captain Belling, then to Kramer, then back to Wolf. He was calculating again, but now the room had shifted. Proof had entered. Wolf said calmly, "You have built your life on avoiding proof. Now proof sits on my desk." Harker's voice remained controlled. "This proves only that my driver bought a coat." Wolf nodded once. "And that a man with your limp wore one in my trap, and that he carried a gun," I said, and dropped it when he ran. Harker's eyes flashed toward me, brief heat under the stone. "You confronted him." "I did," I said. "He ran anyway." Wolf's voice stayed mild. "That is the mistake. The man who knocks once believes he never needs a second chance. Last night he fled, and he left proof behind, 2 buttons and a gun. He did it twice." Silence settled. You could feel it. Even Fritz, moving quietly in the background, paused as if he could hear the shift in the air. Harold Sennett swallowed hard and said, in a small voice, "He paid me." Captain Belling's head turned sharply. "What?" Sennett's shoulders sagged. "He paid me a man with a limp." Cash told me what to say. Told me if I changed it, I'd regret it. Kramer's face went dark. That enough for you, Harker? Harker's calm held, but it was now strained, like polished stone under a hammer. This is nonsense. This is a pile of coincidences arranged by Mr. Wolf for his own entertainment. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Number, it is a pile of your habits. He leaned forward slightly. You sent the one knock envelope to draw me away and measure the brownstone. You ensured Hollis would be found and used to direct us. You killed Mercer on schedule so the police would arrive quickly. You paid a witness to point at Eddie Rook so the case would close fast. You trimmed Peter Doss when he became a risk, and when I threatened you with proof, you came yourself because you do not trust others with your survival. Harker's lips thinned. You cannot prove I killed anyone. Wolf's voice stayed calm. Inspector Kramer can prove you attempted to conceal evidence and that you possessed a key to a unit you did not rent. Captain Belling can investigate the tips fed to his squad, and Mr. Keene can explain why he fears you. The rest will follow, because when proof exists, more proof appears. Keene's face had gone pale. He spoke suddenly, as if the room had become too tight to breathe. He warned Mercer, Keene said. Harker warned him once. Wolf's eyes moved to Keene. Explain. Keene's hands trembled slightly, the first sign he was human. Mercer told me Harker came to his office weeks ago. He said Mercer had made mistakes. He said there would be no second chance. Mercer laughed, because Mercer thought money made him safe. After that, Mercer started keeping the ledger. He wanted insurance. Wolf nodded once. Insurance is proof. Proof is a second knock. Harker's eyes hardened. Keene, you should be careful. Captain Belling's voice snapped. Don't threaten a witness in my presence. Harker's gaze shifted to Belling, and for the first time his calm showed contempt. Your presence is temporary. Wolf said gently, Mr. Harker, you have made an error. Harker looked at him. What error? Wolf's eyes were cold. You came. You appeared, you sat in my chair. You believed your composure would substitute for proof. It will not. Kramer stood. All right, Harker, you're coming with me downtown for questioning. Harker did not move. His eyes stayed on Wolf. You think you have won. Wolf's voice was calm. Number, I think you have lost control of the narrative. That is worse for you. Harker's mouth tightened, and then, slowly, he stood. The limp was there again, measured, careful, as if he refused to allow even his body to betray him. As the detectives moved in, Harker said quietly to Wolf, You count, you think counting saves you. Wolf regarded him. Counting saves the truth. Harker's eyes narrowed. The truth kills. Wolf's voice stayed mild. Only when men like you handle it. Kramer led Harker out, his face grim. Captain Belling followed, already barking orders into his own phone, voice tight with the anger of a man who realizes he has been used. Sennett was led away by a detective, shoulders slumped. Keene remained seated, trembling slightly now that the fear had become public. When the room finally emptied, the brownstone felt quieter than it should. Fritz resumed moving, adjusting glasses, restoring order as if order were something you could polish. I looked at Wolf. You did it, office gathering, reveal. Wolf leaned back and picked up his beer. Yes, I said, no confession from Harker. Wolf's eyes narrowed slightly. Confessions are for the sentimental, proof is for the rational. I glanced at the brass buttons on his desk, two small circles of shining arrogance, now stripped of their power because Wolf had forced them to exist as evidence. Wolf said, Archie, you may now stop counting. I blinked. I may. Wolf's mouth tightened. For tonight, tomorrow you will count something else. Outside, New York kept moving. Inside, Nero Wolfe sat in his chair, victorious, not because he had chased a man down an alley, but because he had made a man who feared receipt sit still long enough for proof to land on a desk. Chapter 10. There are mornings in New York when the city looks scrubbed and innocent, as if the night never happened, and nobody ever lied for money or killed for convenience. Those mornings are usually lying too, just with better light. The morning after Wolf's office gathering, the brownstone smelled of coffee, beeswax, and the faint botanical seriousness that rises down the stairwell from the orchid rooms when Theodore Horstman has been at work. Wolf had already spent his 2 hours upstairs, had already corrected a leaf that had the nerve to droop, and had already seated himself in the red leather chair with the air of a man who has performed his duty and expects the world to respond in kind. The world, being New York, did not. Kramer arrived at 9:30 with Captain Belling, 2 detectives, and the kind of expression that suggests he had spent the night arguing with paperwork and losing. "You better have something," Kramer growled as he came into the office. "Because my people are not going to keep dancing to your tune." Wolf did not look up from his book. "Your people have been dancing to Mr. Harker's tune for weeks. Inspector, do not complain to me about music." Kramer's face reddened, but Captain Belling raised a hand slightly, the gesture of a man who knows when to let a bigger mouth tire itself out. Belling said, "Mr. Wolf, you asked us to return." Wolf lowered his book, set it aside with deliberate calm, and folded his hands. "Yes, Captain, we will finish." Kramer planted himself in the yellow chair as if daring it to support him. Belling took the chair beside him, posture stiff. The detectives remained near the door, not from courtesy, but from habit. I sat at my desk and glanced at the side table where Fritz had set a plate of biscuits and a pot of coffee. Nobody touched them. When law enforcement is in the room, food becomes suspicious. Wolf's eyes moved to the door. "Archie." I got up and opened it. Clay Harker entered as if he were walking into a private club he had paid for, though the fact that Captain Belling had ordered him brought back was written in the 2 detectives flanking him. He was dressed the same as the day before, the expensive overcoat with its polished brass buttons, the hat set just so, the gloves new, the limp controlled. He carried himself with the calm of a man who believes calm is a weapon. 2 detectives were with him, but not holding him. That told me something, and it told me it was not pleasant. They were keeping him close without giving him the dignity of looking arrested. They'd booked him overnight, but the desk had cut him loose on a tight leash. No charge that would stick yet. Not without something you could staple to paper. The police were still operating in the realm of suspicion and leverage, not in the realm of iron. Harker looked at Wolf. "You have a habit of arranging rooms people find themselves in." Wolf regarded him. "You have a habit of obeying your own curiosity." Harker's mouth tightened slightly. "Am I free to leave?" Wolf's voice was mild. "In a civilized city, freedom depends on what you have done. Sit." Harker sat in the red leather chair again, as if claiming it. His eyes flicked once to the door behind him and then away. That flick was so small it could have been nothing. With Harker, nothing was seldom nothing. Stanley Keene arrived next, invited by Captain Belling's insistence, and escorted by a detective with the air of a man escorting a clerk who would rather be at a funeral. Keene's neatness had survived the night, but his eyes looked tired. Neat men hate fatigue. It makes their discipline wrinkle. Harold Sennett arrived last, without his cap, without his false confidence, escorted by a uniform whose face was blank in the way men become blank when they have seen too much fear in too many eyes. Sennett looked at Harker once and then stared hard at the carpet, as if the carpet might forgive him. Wolf waited until everyone was in place. Then he said, "Before we proceed, Captain Belling, I require a minor service, since you have brought us all here to put what we know into one room." Belling's eyes narrowed. "What?" Wolf said. "Kindly have an officer stationed outside the front door, another at the rear, and 1 man positioned inside the hall, directly behind the office door, quietly." Kramer snorted. "Wolf, what are you doing? Setting a trap in your own house?" Wolf's gaze stayed calm. "Yes, Inspector. Traps are more reliable at home." Belling hesitated, then nodded to one of the detectives who left the room. Another detective stepped out a moment later. I heard their footsteps in the hall. Harker watched all of this with polished calm. "You expect violence." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "I expect habit. A man who does everything once attempts one move when he believes he is cornered." Harker's smile was thin. "You flatter yourself." Wolf's voice stayed mild. "Flattery is unnecessary. I have evidence. Harker's eyes flicked to my desk drawer, where last night's gun and buttons were locked away, then back to Wolf. He did not lose his calm, but his calm now had a tension at the edges. Wolf leaned slightly forward. Yesterday, Wolf said, I demonstrated a structure. Today, I will demonstrate proof. Kramer muttered. About time. Wolf ignored him. Archie, the buttons. I opened the drawer and removed the 2 brass buttons in their bags, along with the earlier button from the original envelope, also bagged. I set all 3 on Wolf's desk. Wolf did not touch them. He did not need to. Their presence did the work. He looked at Harker. You have denied involvement. You have offered composure as a substitute. Now we will remove the luxury of denial. Harker's voice remained controlled. You have buttons. You have gossip. You have a detective's bad temper. None of that is a charge. Wolf nodded once. True, therefore I have brought a man who deals in charges and counts. Keene shifted slightly, uneasy. Wolf continued. Not financial counts, Mr. Keene, stitch counts. I heard movement in the hall, the sound of someone being guided carefully, and then Fritz appeared at the doorway. Mr. Wolf, Fritz said softly. The gentleman you requested is here, Wolf said. Send him in. The tailor entered like a man stepping into a church where he is not sure if he is the priest or the accused. He was small, elderly, and meticulously dressed. Not flashy, perfect. His hair was silver and combed flat. His hands were clean. His eyes were sharp and slightly offended. The eyes of a man who has spent his life correcting seams and does not enjoy being placed among police officers like a witness to a bar fight. He carried a leather case, and he held it as carefully as a doctor holds instruments. Wolf inclined his head. Mr. Latham. The tailor blinked. Mr. Wolf. Harker's eyes narrowed a fraction. His calm held, but it had tightened. Wolf gestured to the chair near my desk. Sit, Mr. Latham. You have been asked here to identify workmanship. Latham sat, posture rigid. My work does not require identification. Wolf's eyes narrowed. This does. He looked at me. Archie, the coat. I had been waiting for that. One of the detectives stepped toward Harker. Sir, remove your coat. Harker's eyes flashed. Number Captain Belling's voice snapped. Yes, this is not optional. Harker held their gaze for a moment, then stood slowly. His limp was visible now, less controlled because he was irritated. He removed his coat with deliberate care, as if even the act of undressing was something to be done with dignity. As he turned, I saw the inside seam and the lining, dark and smooth, expensive. He handed the coat to the detective, as if handing over something distasteful. The detective brought it to Wolf's desk. Wolf did not touch it. He indicated Latham with a glance. Mr. Latham, Wolf said, is this your work? Latham did not rush. He stood and approached the coat, as if approaching a patient. He examined the collar, the lining, the stitching at the cuff, the buttonholes. His face remained controlled, but his eyes sharpened with professional attention. It is not mine, Latham said at first. Harker's mouth tightened slightly, almost a smile. Then Latham leaned closer and touched the inside seam with one fingertip, and his expression changed. His eyes narrowed, his lips thinned. He looked up at Wolf. It is mine. Harker's faint smile vanished. Wolf's voice remained mild. How do you know? Latham's tone became precise. Tailors speak in the language of certainty. The lining is cut in a particular way. The stitch count along the seam is mine. The buttonhole is hand, finished with a twist that I do not permit my assistants to imitate. He looked at the buttons still attached to the coat. And those, Wolf said. The brass. Latham nodded. Yes. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Explain. Latham's face showed mild irritation. The irritation of a craftsman being asked to justify craft to men who live in sloppy worlds. A year ago, I purchased a batch of brass buttons from a supplier who claimed they were standard. They were not. The brass had a rare composition, slightly heavier, with a specific sheen. It was not pleasant to work with. It dulled in a particular pattern. Kramer grunted. Rare brass, you can tell that. Latham looked at him, as if looking at an untrained dog. Inspector, I can tell you the difference between thread dyed yesterday and thread dyed 3 months ago. I can tell you when a man has gained 5 pounds, brass is not difficult. Wolf's mouth tightened slightly. That was his version of amusement. Latham continued. I used that batch only once, only on one coat. I did not like it. It created a reflection under certain lights that was too bright. My customers do not enjoy being seen, they enjoy being known. His gaze flicked to Harker. The man who ordered the coat insisted on those buttons. Harker's face remained stone, but his eyes had sharpened into something colder. Wolf said calmly, The only coat made with that batch. Latham nodded. Yes. Wolf gestured toward the bagged buttons on the desk. Do these match? Latham leaned in. He did not touch the evidence bags. He did not need to. He looked at them, looked at the coat buttons, looked again. They match, he said. That rare brass, that finish, that batch. Kramer's jaw tightened, Belling's eyes narrowed, Keene's posture stiffened, as if he had just seen the tacksman. Harker spoke, voice controlled. This proves nothing except that my tailor has opinions about metal. Wolf regarded him. It proves that the buttons recovered from Mercer's office, from the dead clerk's pocket, and from Archie's trap were from the same batch as your custom coat. And Mr. Latham states that batch was used only once. Harker's eyes remained cold. Buttons can be stolen. Wolf nodded. Yes, they can, but the thread cannot. Harker's gaze flicked. Thread. Wolf turned to Latham. Mr. Latham, do you use distinctive thread? Latham's lips thinned. Of course, good thread is not purchased in department stores. Wolf's voice stayed mild. Do you keep a record of its lot? Latham looked mildly insulted. Yes. Wolf nodded toward Saul, who stepped forward and placed a small envelope on the desk. Saul said, We obtained fiber samples from the clerk's coat and from the Mercer office. We also obtained thread from Latham's shop. Wolf did not look at Saul. He looked at Harker. Your driver bought coats. Your tailor recorded thread. Your buttons are unique. Your habit is restraint. You avoid receipts, but you cannot avoid the physical facts you wear. Harker's expression did not change. For a moment I thought he might actually remain polished stone forever. Then Wolf shifted the attack, the way Wolf always does when he has finished with objects and wants to use people. He turned to Harold Sennett. Mr. Sennett, Wolf said, yesterday you claimed you saw Eddie Rook run from Mercer Logistics seconds after the shot. You also described details of a coat that you could not see. Sennett swallowed. His eyes flicked to Harker. Then away. Wolf's voice was calm. I will repeat for the room what you said, because repetition matters. Kramer shifted, irritated. Wolf, we already got his statement. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Inspector, statements are often lies. Repetition reveals coaching. He looked at Sennett. You described the coat as dark knee, length, with bright brass buttons that caught the light. And you said the buttons were the kind that look expensive, not uniform issue. You also described the button spacing and the way the coat moved. Sennett's face reddened. I saw it. Wolf leaned forward slightly. Number. You did not. You were across the street. The door was recessed. The lighting was behind the runner. You could not see brass shine, and you could not see button spacing, yet you offered those details, because someone gave you a script. Sennett shook his head weakly. Number Wolf's eyes narrowed. Then say the description again, word for word. Sennett blinked. What? Wolf's voice stayed mild. Say it again. If it is your own observation, it will change. Human memory changes. If it was coached, it will repeat. Sennett's mouth opened, closed, his hands clenched in his lap. Kramer leaned forward, eyes hard. Do it. Sennett's eyes darted. He looked as if he wanted to faint, but fainting takes courage. He began, haltingly, dark coat, knee, length brass buttons, bright, expensive, The way it swings when he runs, Wolf said. Continue. Sennett swallowed and continued, and the words came faster now, as if pulled by a groove. Buttons spaced wide, not tight like a uniform, shiny in the light, like a rich man's coat, not a worker, not a doorman. Wolf's eyes narrowed. You used the phrase rich man's coat yesterday as well. Sennett froze. Wolf's voice remained calm. You did not invent that phrase. Someone gave it to you. Sennett's breath hitched. Wolf turned his head slightly. Archie, who paid him. I said, a man with a careful limp. Cash, no envelope, no receipt. Wolf nodded once. He looked at Sennett again. Mr. Sennett, who coached you? Sennett whispered. Nobody. Wolf's voice was flat. Lies are second knocks too. They leave marks. Captain Belling spoke then, voice sharp and controlled. Mr. Sennett, you will answer. If you do not, you will be charged. If you do, you may be treated as a frightened fool instead of a criminal. Sennett's shoulders sagged. He looked at the floor, then he whispered. The driver. Harker's eyes narrowed. A flicker of anger. Wolf's voice stayed calm. Name. Sennett swallowed. Dennis Vale. Saul's expression did not change. His eyes sharpened slightly, as if ticking off an item on a list already written. Wolf said, He told you what to say. Sennett nodded, face twisted with shame. He told me, say it like you saw it. Say it clean. Say it once. He said if I repeated it, it would sound true. Wolf's mouth tightened. A man who does everything once. Sennett whispered. He said I'd only get asked once. He said nobody asks twice if you sound sure. Captain Belling's jaw clenched. My men. Yes, Captain. Your men were hungry for certainty. He fed them. Kramer growled. Where's Vale? Saul spoke calmly. He was not difficult to find once we stopped pretending the tips were gifts. Wolf nodded, satisfied. Bring him in. One of the detectives stepped out. Moments later, Dennis Vale was brought into the office. Vale was in his 40s, thin, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of caution. He wore a plain coat. Not expensive, not shabby. The kind of coat a man wears when his job is to be invisible. He glanced at Harker first, then away quickly, as if eye contact would burn. Kramer stood. Vale. Sit. Vale sat on the edge of a chair near the door, hands clasped tightly. Wolf regarded him. Mr. Vale, you bought coats. Vale's mouth tightened. I buy what I am told. Wolf nodded. You refuse receipts. Vale's eyes flicked. Receipts are unnecessary. Wolf's voice stayed mild. Receipts are proof. Proof is a second knock. Your employer avoids second knocks. Vale said nothing. Wolf gestured toward Sennett. You coached him. Vale's jaw tightened. I don't know him. Sennett's voice rose, cracked. You do. You told me what to say. You told me rich man's coat. Vale's eyes closed for a fraction of a second. That fraction was his confession. Captain Belling's voice was cold. Vale, you have been feeding my squad tips. Vale swallowed. I make calls. Belling leaned forward. For whom? Vale's gaze flicked to Harker again. Then down. Kramer barked. Answer. Wolf spoke calmly, and his calm was more frightening than Kramer's bark. Mr. Vale, you will answer, because your employer's signature is now on my desk. Vale swallowed. His hands clenched. Wolf said, the buttons, the brass batch, the tailor, the thread, and the gun Archie recovered. You and your employer cannot scrub these away without confessing further. Vale whispered, I don't want trouble. Wolf's eyes narrowed. You already have trouble. You participated in framing Eddie Rook. You participated in paying a witness. You participated in steering police. And you likely participated in trimming witnesses. Vale flinched. Wolf's voice stayed mild. Peter Doss died under a bridge. He carried fibers matching an expensive coat. The same brand you buy, the same kind you refuse to receipt. If you did not participate, Then you know who did. Vale's breathing quickened. Kramer's voice was hard. Vale, talk. Vale's mouth opened-closed. He looked again at Harker. Harker's voice was quiet, calm, and cold. Dennis. It was only his first name, only one word. But it landed in the room like a hand on a throat. Vale froze. Wolf said, "Mr. Harker, do not attempt intimidation in my house. It will fail." Harker's eyes narrowed. "You speak as if you control something." Wolf's voice stayed mild. "I control my office. That is sufficient." Vale's hands trembled. He looked at Wolf, then at Captain Belling, then at Kramer. The balance of fear in the room was shifting. Vale was realizing that Harker's protection was not protection. It was a contract with a demon. Vale whispered, "He told me, one call, one story, one collar. He said if the police get Eddie fast, they stop digging. He said they like easy." Belling's jaw clenched. "My men," Wolf nodded. "Yes." Kramer leaned forward. "Mercer," Vale swallowed. Mercer was going to talk. He had the ledger. He was scared. Hollis tried to warn him. Keene's face went paler. Wolf said, "Hollis sent the one. Knock envelope." Vale's eyes widened slightly. "He did." Hollis panicked. He thought Wolf would protect him. "Hollis sent you away, thinking it would put distance between him and Harker." Wolf's eyes narrowed, and instead it allowed the planner to measure my absence. Vale nodded miserably. "He watched. He watched your house. He watched to see if you left. He said if you don't answer twice, you can be managed." Wolf's mouth tightened. "Restraint as a method." Vale's voice shook. Mercer was supposed to be quiet. He wasn't. He was going to testify to people at the club. He thought Charity would protect him. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Charity protects criminals more often than saints. Kramer's face was dark. "And Eddie Rook." Vale swallowed. "Eddie was bait. The text went through our relay. One job, 1 minute, one door. Eddie shows up, hears the shot, runs, witness points, police close." Wolf nodded once, fast guilty. Vale's shoulders sagged. "Yes." Silence held for a moment, thick as winter air. Then Harker moved. It was not sudden at first. It began as a shift in his posture, a subtle adjustment of his weight. The polished stone calm cracked at the edge, because now the room was not merely suspicious. Now it was informed. Informed rooms are dangerous to men who survive on ignorance. Harker's eyes flicked to the door. I saw it. Wolf saw it. Kramer saw it. Harker's right hand moved toward the inside pocket of his coat, the coat still on Wolf's desk. One move, one reach, one exit, restraint collapsing into action. Kramer lunged half out of his chair. "Harker, don't." Harker's fingers closed around something under the coat lining. He was faster than his limp suggested. But Wolf had arranged his trap in his own house, and his house obeys him. The office door opened. A uniformed officer was standing directly behind it, exactly where Wolf had instructed, silent as a wall. The officer stepped in smoothly, blocking the doorway with his body. Behind him, another officer appeared from the hall. Harker froze for a fraction of a second, startled not by the men, but by the fact that the exit he had assumed was empty was not. That fraction was all the time a policeman needs. The officer behind the door grabbed Harker's wrist. Kramer surged forward and seized the other arm. Harker jerked once hard, but he was off balance. His limp made that one miscalculation fatal. The object he had reached for dropped onto the carpet. Not a gun, a key ring, several keys, including a long, narrow key that looked exactly like the kind used on storage unit locks. Foreknowledge. Harker had been carrying proof in his pocket, and in his panic he had let it fall. Kramer's voice was a growl. "That's enough." Harker fought once more, not flailing, not screaming, just one precise attempt to twist free, the way a man tries one lock-pick before admitting the door is barred. It failed. The officers took hold of him. Harker's face was no longer polished stone. It was tight, furious, and very human. The restraint that had been his mythology had collapsed into the ugly reality of a man being held. Captain Belling stood, voice cold. "Clay Harker, you're being detained for questioning, right now." Harker's eyes cut to Wolf, hatred sharp. "You think you've done something." Wolf remained seated. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand. He did not even look pleased. He looked as he looks when someone places a glass on his desk without a coaster. "I have done what you refuse to permit," Wolf said calmly. "I have made your signature visible." Harker's mouth tightened. "A signature is not a murder." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Number, but it convicts the man who insists he leaves none." Harker's limp became irrelevant now, because the police controlled the rhythm. Harker did not speak again. He did not beg. He did not bargain. He saved his words, perhaps out of habit, or perhaps because he knew that words, once spoken, can be counted. When they were gone, the office felt larger, as if the air had been holding its breath and had finally released it. Harold Sennett slumped in his chair, eyes wet, and whispered, "I didn't want anyone dead." Wolf looked at him. "Yet you helped create death. The city does not excuse foolishness, because it is frightened." Sennett flinched. Captain Belling spoke to a detective, and Sennett was led away. Keene remained seated, hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Wolf," he said, voice thin. "I only kept accounts." Wolf regarded him. "You kept silence. Silence is also an account." Keene swallowed. "What will happen?" Wolf's voice stayed mild. "You will speak to the district attorney and to the police. You will provide what you know. You will do so now, not later. The man who knocks once does not enjoy delays." Keene nodded quickly, eager to obey now that obedience had shifted to the safer side. Captain Belling lingered. His face looked older than it had when he entered. "Mr. Wolf," he said. "My squad. Those calls. Those tips." Wolf's gaze softened slightly, which is the closest Wolf comes to sympathy for a policeman. "Captain, your men wanted certainty. Someone gave it to them. They will not recover by being punished alone. They will recover by learning to distrust ease." Belling's mouth tightened. "That's hard." Wolf nodded. "Yes, that is why it is useful." Belling looked at Wolf, then at me. "You did good work." Coming from a captain, that was practically a bouquet. He left with Kramer, and the brownstone settled into its own quieter order again. Fritz entered, glanced at the disturbed chairs, the evidence on the desk, and the tired faces, and began tidying, as if tidying were a form of justice. I sat down heavily at my desk and exhaled. "So that's it." Wolf picked up his beer and sipped. "It is, no last." "Minute miracle confession," I said. Wolf's eyes narrowed slightly. "Confessions are for men who still believe words can save them." Mr. Harker believed restraint could save him. It could not. I nodded toward the tailor, who was still standing near the desk with his leather case clutched as if he might be arrested for good taste. "Mr. Latham, you can go. Thank you." Latham looked at Wolf, then at me. "I do not enjoy police." Wolf's mouth tightened. "Nor do they enjoy you, yet today you served the truth." Latham blinked, as if surprised to be praised by a man who regards most humans as poorly designed. He nodded, once gathered his case, and left with Fritz showing him out. When the door closed, Wolf leaned back and folded his hands. "Archie," Wolf said. "Yes." "A man who knocks once believes he controls the room," Wolf said. "He believes he announces himself without exposing himself. He believes the knock is a command, and silence is safety." I stared at the spot where Harker had stood, reaching once, failing once. "But the knock itself is the problem," Wolf nodded. "Yes, the knock is a signature. Habits are signatures. Restraint is a signature. Avoiding receipts is a signature. And signatures convict." I rubbed my eyes, feeling the fatigue settle in my bones now that it had permission. "Mercer and the clerk." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Their deaths will be addressed by the courts as far as courts can reach. The larger mechanism, the shipping charity laundering, the committee protection, the exploitation of police convenience, will now be exposed because Harker's signature has been forced onto paper. I thought of Eddie Rook in a cell, frightened, framed, and used as fast guilty. Eddie gets out. Wolf nodded once. Yes, Captain Belling will see to that. He will also have an unpleasant conversation with his squad. Perhaps it will help. And Hollis? I asked. Wolf's gaze shifted briefly upward, toward the orchids. Hollis attempted to survive by summoning me. He may survive yet. His injury was not fatal. His cowardice may be, but cowardice is not a crime. I leaned back and let the quiet fill in. Outside, the city continued its usual noise. A horn complained. A truck rumbled. Somewhere. Someone shouted at someone else about something that felt urgent and probably wasn't. Fritz returned and placed a tray on the side table, coffee and a small plate of something civilized. He looked at the repaired window, now covered neatly with temporary glass, and his mouth tightened with the disapproval of a man who believes household damage is a moral failing. Wolf noticed his look and said, "Fritz, I will charge Mr. Harker for the brick." Fritz's expression softened slightly. In Fritz's world, restitution is a kind of harmony. I stood, stretched, and felt the case finally settle into something complete. "One knock," I said. Wolf's eyes narrowed. "One knock. One move," I added. Wolf nodded. "One mistake." I looked at him. "And you never left your chair?" Wolf's mouth tightened slightly. "I left it once. Archie, that was sufficient." I laughed despite myself, and it came out tired but real. As I moved toward the door to lock it, I glanced back at Wolf in his red leather chair, the brownstones steady around him, the orchids above, the city outside. A man had believed he could control the room with one knock and no receipts. He had been wrong, because the knock, once noticed, becomes evidence, and evidence, once counted, becomes truth.